Right, we seem to be live. Okay, this week our science of whatever is in a way a two-parter, because we want to look at the science of young Earth creationism. Now, because this is a big topic, we decided to split it into two. And one is going to deal with the age of the Earth itself, and then next week's hangout is going to deal with special creation. Now, this is only because I think the topic is too big for just one hangout. It does need two separate ones, because we'll be looking at physics and geology when it comes to the age of the Earth, but we'll be looking more at biology when it comes to creation. So nice wee split off. So I tried to get a geologist in for this week, but unfortunately I've not been able to. So we're going to have to go with Dr. Matthew Hunt, the physicist, me with my usual understanding of dating methods, which is that which is useful to biologists, and everybody else who's been reading around the subject or who has come across certain arguments from young Earth creationists about the age of the Earth. So I'm not going to bother introducing everybody, because you should know all their ugly mugs by now. Hey, Wayne! And we'll just get started. So here's our problem. We date the Earth to over 4 billion years. The young Earthers date it to something under 10,000 years, and some of them will even be more specific and go for just over 6,000 years. I think it's 6,006 years, calculated by Bishop Usher, who took the genealogies from the Bible, worked out generation times, and decided that that is when the Earth was created. And he put it on, I think it was it the 1st of October at 9 AM in the morning, because that was the start of the Cambridge term.
Good Lord.
At what point did he do this? What year was this?
No, this is I'm just checking out. As I say, I've not had time this week to check everything out, because I've had one of those weeks.
Down somewhere. 1700s, was it? Or 1600s?
Something like that. And before anybody says anything, Bishop Usher was not a Roman Catholic. I've had that argument so many times.
Was it Ulster Presbyterian, was it?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, I've got the information about him right here, if y'all want to hear
Excellent.
it. Let's see, he was a Archbishop of Armagh and Primate of all Ireland.
Armagh.
Whatever that is.
Armagh.
Yeah, okay, I'm lousy on that. He calculated the date of creation as the 23rd of October, 4004 BC, and he did it back in the 1600s. Let's see. So now that would make it about 6,000 years old, adding 2,000 years.
Yeah. Yeah. About that.
And he did it using the genealogy or ages of people in genealogies in the Old Testament, going from Adam up to he had a cutoff date or a person that he stopped at, and I'm not sure who that was. I don't have that here.
Yeah.
But
and one of the problems with that is we don't know if anybody's missing from the genealogies.
Yeah, I mean,
The
as is obvious from reading Paul's book on the subject, the genealogies are all over the place. It's just an entire mess. I'm not saying that Paul's book's a mess.
Not yet, but give the time. So,
here we go. He stopped at the death of Nebuchadnezzar II, I think, and worked backwards from there.
So we have got somebody sitting down and basically taking the list of names out of the Bible, giving them an average time for generation, and working out when Adam and Eve first arose. And then we've got modern day science, which is looking at the dating of rocks. Now I want to say something right here and now. Anybody who brings up the subject of C14 dating of rocks is into the naughty step will be beaten with a big stick with a nail in the end until they cry, and then they'll have their arm ripped off and they'll be beaten to death with a wet end. Is
And then thrown out the airlock.
And why is that, Fiona? Come on, everybody, all together now.
Ralph?
No,
That is one of the things that does my head in. It really does. I just
Hang on though, Fiona, I've got to take issue. There's viable proteins in dinosaur bones.
Oh no!
Stop that.
Okay.
Stop that.
Get that airlock primed.
Yeah.
He'll be around. He'll be around. You know he will.
Hudson, you remember, I'm going to be seeing you soon. And I'm a big stick with a nail in the end.
Never mind, Fiona. I'll be able to just lift you up with one hand.
Oh, you beast!
So now we get on to we've looked at the method. I put that in inverted commas. Used by Bishop Usher. So the method that science uses to date the Earth itself, and basically it goes with the radiometric dating of rocks using various isotopes that have pretty long half-lives. And the one I know most about is the potassium-argon dating method. So I'll just give just a quickie on that. In that, argon is a rare gas. There's not a lot of it around. And because it's a gas, it does what the gas in your bottle of Pepsi does. If you give the bottle a right good shake, everything looks normal. But you let the pressure out and the gas will all bubble out of it. And that's what argon does when it erupts, when the rock erupts from a volcano. The argon gas can bubble out of the molten rock. Now that means that the rock starts off with pretty close to zero argon in it. Now, the other way you can get argon is from the radioactive decay of potassium-40. And once rock is solid, argon can't get back into it, obviously. It can't diffuse into it. So if you find argon in a rock, it has to have come from the decay of potassium-40, because there's plenty of potassium-40 there. And the half-life of potassium-40 it's in the billions, I believe. Let me just get the figure so it's handy. I don't want anybody saying I'm just guesstimating. It is 1.248 times 10 to the 9 years. Okay? That's a long, long time. And so that is why, in very long time spans, you're able to use the decay of potassium-40. So when you want to date your rock, you get your samples. You have to sort the samples to make sure that it doesn't actually contain already solidified crystals, which existed as crystals at depth and temperature. And one of the, I think, usual culprits is olivine. So you have to remove those crystals from your sample before you can then send it off for radiometric dating. And that will become relevant soon. So you can see that using that method, you are basically setting the clock at 0 when the rock is molten and then timing it from that period. If the rock remelts the argon would escape, and so it would reset the clock to 0. So the timing that you get from that method is how long since the rock was last molten. Not the age of the rock, not the age of the material itself. You're getting how long since it was last molten. Okay? So that's my wee bit. Now, there are other methods that have superseded that one, and I think there's some of the concordance methods, the argon method, which I don't know as much about. But I'm sure our physicist, Dr. Hunt, will know something about these other methods of dating various rocks.
Well, well, my specialty isn't exactly in nuclear physics. I do have a I do have a general understanding of the actual method that they use, though. And one of the first things that I've got to point out is half-life. Now, many of the creationists claim that the half-life isn't constant of a given radioactive decay, but you can actually prove this by some simple mathematics. What you do is you say, suppose your sample is decaying and it has n radioactive atoms in it, and then it decays to n minus delta n, for example. Now, the probability of decay is given by delta n over n. Now, what you've got to do is you've got to ask yourself, what's this a function of, this delta n over n? And what you do is you go back to your experiment and you have a number of experimental observations. One of these is that radioactive decay is random. There's no mechanism which leads to a decay of a particular atom, so it's random. And two, that a decay of one radioactive atom doesn't initiate a decay of another atom. So the decays aren't linked to one another. So what that means is that the function delta n over n isn't a function of the number of radioactive atoms in your sample, and it's not a function of time because it's random. So what you're left with is it is a function of the length of time you do your observation. Obviously, if you do your observation for longer, you get more radioactive decays, and so the delta n over n is proportional to the time interval that you do your your analysis on. So you've got the delta n over n being proportional to the time interval, and to get that into an equals, you say it's a constant times the time interval, and you go away and you do some calculus, and you get that the number of the number of decays exponentially decreases. And so when you work out the half-life, and the half-life is when half the amount of your initial substance has decayed, you find that the half-life is proportional to that proportionality constant, and is therefore constant. So by basic calculus and some experimental results, you do get the half-life is constant.
It's a similar principle to LD50 tests, isn't it? It's not how much to kill one, or how much time for one thing to decay. it's like at a population level, isn't it?
Exactly. And the same sort of equations can be applied to almost to a lot of things. So now we know, and scientists have done a lot of work on what can affect the half-life, and we've seen that it's pretty resilient. And one thing that creationists do claim is that it changes over time. Well, in order to do age testing on something, you put it in an oven and heat it up, because after time the water molecules escaped or whatever. So that's what you do. You put it in an oven, heat it up, and then do your radiometric testing afterwards, and you find that you get the same half-life for it. So we know that the half-lives don't change much or significantly or at all over a period of time. So that shows. So that's the basic equation, which states that the rate of decay is proportional to the amount you have, which is just radioactive decay. It's just the exponential decrease, and so that shows that lambda is constant. So now all you have to do is you do your you do your test. So I mean, one of the things that creationists do say is that you have to know the amount of material to begin with, and that's not the case. So what you do is you have you look for your radioactive parent atom, and you look for the amount of daughter atoms. And you assume that there's a number of daughter atoms there as well. So as well as daughter atoms, you're also going to get daughter atoms which are not radioactive. So what you do is you basically you do some analysis, and I've left the link to the actual maths in the YouTube links. So you do some maths and you find out that you can work out the ratios of radioactive daughter atoms to the non-radioactive daughter atoms, and you just plot these ratios of the parent atoms against the daughter atoms, or divided by the number of the number of non-radioactive daughter atoms, because they don't change over time. Once they decay into the into their stable state, then they will stay there. So you know how much that is. So once you do that, you can actually plot a graph of all your different samples. You can plot a graph, and what you'll find that it's a straight line graph. And so the mathematics tells you that the gradient of that graph is related to the half-life, or sorry, the age of the sample. And so that's all you do. You just measure the gradient of that graph to give you the age of your sample. And it's that.
Can I just point something out here? I just want to point this out, since it's been brought to my attention in the side chat. Before we even went live, while the YouTube link was still saying starting soon, we had 11 downvotes. Our discussion has been downvoted before it began. And I wonder,
saw 7 before I came in.
Yeah, there's 11 now. So I wonder if the person or people who are doing the downvoting would like to explain what it is they didn't like about the YouTube link showing a black screen with the words starting soon on it. Because I have absolutely no control over what is shown prior to a Hangout going live. So what was your problem with starting soon? ...
I think the motto, to be up to date, Fiona, is Creationism Closing mines since 4004 BC at 9 a.m.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
hopefully,
there
when
we
they
have it.
hopefully they'll answer in a rebuttal video and not come in here and answer.
No, well, it would be nice if they would actually explain underneath the YouTube video why
Well,
they felt it necessary to downvote all 11 of them, or
I
all one of them, and there are multiple SOCs.
But
Yeah.
what's obviously going on here though is that they were downvoted, a bit like the age of the Earth when it comes to creationists. They were downvoted by all that stuff that actually occurs before the world starts. You know.
Yeah, obviously.
Right.
So, I wanted to throw that in here, just to highlight the absolute idiocy of downvoting a discussion that hadn't even started. And if that is the mindset that we are dealing with here, now then the gloves are off. I was actually planning on having quite a calm and sensible discussion about the age of the Earth. However, the gloves are off.
And can I
Because
just
and socks are really pointless.
and can I
So-
just ask the coward or cowards who's doing this to please like Fiona did, why don't you just come forward with your real account, not your fakes and your socks. Put a comment in the YouTube video and say why you find the subject so objectionable even before it started. Let's
In fact, what I will do is I am going to actually just drop this link to the Hangout itself in the YouTube comment section.
Oh,
And then
no.
the 11 people or socks who downvoted it can fight amongst themselves to get in. Or anybody else who wants to come in can. Now, I've just lost my link because I've just managed to
Get
put in
ready.
a link to a fission
got it.
reactor. Give us a sec. Right, here we go. Dump it
Tommy
in.
Hall. Tommy Hall in 10, 9.
Oh no!
No.
Right,
Okay.
here we go. 1, 2, 3, and post.
Okay.
Well,
That
actually,
is the
the
link
people that
now.
oh, sorry.
The
No,
link is now
actually,
underneath the video on YouTube, and I am
Okay.
inviting those who decided to downvote this discussion before it even started to come in and explain why they downvoted a discussion that at the time they voted didn't exist. Are they
actually,
timed?
if they're really against if they're against this series, they should make their own series showing their science. Like we're doing with this.
Well,
Yeah.
the last time they tried that, the video was actually removed. The last sciencey one I saw, because apparently, was it sickle cell anemia causes you to catch malaria?
Yeah.
Yeah, that one. You know the one I mean.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I've got it
Back to-
downloaded.
Buddy,
I said I've got it downloaded. So do a bunch of other people.
Yeah.
When those of you out here, if you're listening, if you think you can slide away by deleting stuff, too late.
They thought that sickle cell anemia caused people to get malaria.
sickle cell anemia causes malaria. Apparently, that is what they
Yeah.
said. But
It's-
anyway, that's not the topic of our discussion. Our
Yeah,
topic
that's
is
totally-
the age of the Earth, right? So,
Right.
socks have been washed, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That airlock's
so,
going to be full.
Yeah.
So here we go. So given what Matthew's told us about radiometric dating, and given the explanation that I gave about the potassium and argon dating, and also one of the things I have dropped into the YouTube bitty is this link to a natural nuclear fission reactor. I'll just put it into the side chat, but it is also on the YouTube thing. And this is about the Oklo reactor. And that is a natural reactor which managed to have self-sustained nuclear reaction because of the amount of uranium that was in it, but not enough to go critical and go kablooey. I think I mentioned this last week. And there's a beautiful little diagram on that wiki page where you can see how that area can go from being subcritical but sustaining a chain reaction to not. It's the way the uranium deposits are moving relative to each other. Do you understand what I mean by that?
Yeah.
And that's been used to look at the constancy of decay rates. Because one of the problems is this: if a decay rate was faster, you would need less material to start that chain reaction. Okay? Because you would have I think it's the neutrons coming from uranium that then bombard the uranium. Is that right, Matthew?
Yes.
Right, and if you increase the number of neutrons that are bombarding that uranium, then you speed up the reaction. And that was seen with, has anybody come across the demon core?
Yes, I know what you
Right.
mean by that, yeah.
Right, now, that was a 6 kilogram ball of, was it uranium, Matthew?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah.
So it was subcritical, okay? There wasn't quite enough there for it to be critical. And Harry Daghlian was doing an experiment using tungsten carbide blocks. And the tungsten carbide, what that does is, as the neutrons radiated out from the core and they disappear off into the ether, he was building a wall of these bricks around it because the neutrons could bounce off the bricks and go back into the core. So that would then increase the number of neutrons that were impacting on the core material. And as he was placing one last brick, the brick slipped out his hand. And that was enough. And it went critical. Now, he knocked the brick away as fast as he could. He died of a massive radiation dose because that humongous reaction started up just because a few extra neutrons were reflected back.
Excuse me, Fiona, is this the Lewis Slotin guy during the...
That's a different guy. The same thing happened to him, and would you believe it? It was the same core. It was the same 6 kilogram core.
Oh no.
He was balancing something on the edge of a screwdriver, and he dropped it.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
Remember the film about it?
It was the same 6 kilogram.
John Cusack played him in the film.
Yes. So that's what would happen if you up the number of neutrons impacting on the uranium. If the decay rate of uranium was faster, then you would have more neutrons impacting on that material in the Oclo reactor, wouldn't you? So it would have gone critical and basically melted down, but it didn't. It's a natural uranium deposit in Africa. And that's one of the reasons why we can be almost certain that decay rates have not changed over a long period of time. The Oclo reactor is absolutely fascinating for the amount of stuff that you can find out from it, just because it still exists and isn't a great big crater in the ground. What I'm going to do is, there's not any point giving you a link to Oclo, because it's even shorter. But there's strong evidence that that deposit was behaving as a natural nuclear fission reactor in Precambrian times. And the reason that they know this is because some of the uranium that they mined out of it eventually had a much lower concentration of uranium-235. And that's what happens to uranium-235 if it's already been in a reactor.
Yeah.
And that's how they discovered the Oak being a natural reactor. So that's what gives us confidence that radiometric decay rates haven't changed. And sorry.
So no, go ahead.
The other thing is that you would also need to take into account the effect that all of that would have on Einstein's equation. Now, Matthew would be able to explain that a wee bit better. But if decay rates were a lot faster, then the amount of energy that would have been coming from radioactive decay of all the various isotopes, I think is enough to melt the crust about 3 times over. As you know, if we're talking about decay rates that were hundreds and thousands of times faster than they are now. And I can't remember the factor you would need to change your decay rate for your.
Oh yeah, I mean, if decay rates were much faster, like creationists claim, or they somehow dropped considerably in the past, so that's why we measure them now.
Mm-hmm.
Then, as you say, the amount of radiation that would be given off would virtually kill the majority of life on Earth.
Yes.
Okay, now remember, for those of you who are listening now, I listened to some lectures from Liberty University on Earth science, and what I wanted to say is they covered this briefly, and their point was that we cannot be sure that decay rates weren't faster in the past. Now, I was hoping they'd give some detailed information, but apparently there were 2 times in the past when the decay rates were much faster, and that is at the creation of the Earth and after the flood, or during the flood. And that's their explanation for why things seem to be older. Now, there may be more information at the rate side or whatever, I don't know, but that's an explanation, but without any data behind it. That was the one. It was actually the best explanation I ever got, because at least you could say God did it.
Yes. Yeah. And I think this goes back to the first hangout that we held on the science of a rough flood. In that, if you want to say it's a miracle, that's fine.
Yeah.
But if you want to explain it by science, then you have to also use the science to see if what you're proposing is actually correct. You can't just use the science in one direction.
Can I just think aloud for a second here?
Yes, go on.
And that's the young Earth, right? Let me get my thoughts in order. Right, so they say Adam and Eve, 6,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. And the flood not long after. Why do they cling to Adam and Eve being then? Surely, to gain more credibility, it would make more sense. Well, I tell you what, let's ask another question. When has Homo sapiens sapiens been dated to? Like the establishment of Cro-Magnon man.
No, Cro-Magnon man is just a name for a particular.
Yeah, I mean,
Homo sapiens. You know what I mean? It just.
I mean the present iteration of man. When was that dated to?
I'm not sure.
Well, let me think. I'm trying to remember. I've got a couple of numbers running through my head.
Yeah.
But either way, I'll let you. Once you come
okay, let's say 1,000,000 years.
Yeah. So wouldn't it make more sense for them to say that their Adam and Eve were? They could quite easily state, knowing what we know now, science, that that Adam and Eve were two very early examples of that subspecies. And therefore, everything else, the flood and that, would fit into a more sensible time frame and narrative than what they're claiming. What holds them to Usher's timeline, other than Usher?
Biblical literalism.
That's
But
something I've wondered about.
But it doesn't say it though, does it? It's only from Usher.
Yeah, but the thing is, this is it. Because they are absolutely literal with this. So was Usher. Usher added up the literal dates, the literal generations. So if you add up the generations, what is literally written in there, and by literally I mean the proper use of the word literal, as in what is written, as is written by the book, not approximate. You get this date that is around 6,000 years old. So they are kind of stuck with it. And in fact, what you're actually seeing now is, because remember, old Earth creationists, they're completely with you, mate. They turn around and say, 6,000 years? Don't talk daft.
Yeah.
They're fine with the idea of an old age. It's only the young Earth creationists that have this fixation for 6,000 years old. And what you're now starting to see is a lot of them kind of slowly backing away from the idea of 6,000 years. Even Ken Ham, the man whose museum is debunked by the rocks it sits on, is now turning around and saying that, well, it could be 6,000 to 10,000 years old. It's like, well, where do you get your 10,000 from, mate? If you're going to be a literal biblical literalist, where do you get your 10,000?
Yeah, and the thing is, the difference between 6 and 10,000 is statistically massive compared to the difference between 13 billion and 14 billion.
It's nearly twice. From their point of view, from the point of view of 10,000 years versus 14.5 billion, it doesn't even, it's not even there, right? It's like a journey between, I think somebody compared it, a journey between London and New York. It's like going the first 6 inches or something like that. It's really, it's not even in the same area. But yeah, they by being literal to the text, they are trapped within that dating time frame. And although they like to kind of weasel out and turn around and say, well, it could be 10,000 years old, they're actually weaseling out of their literalist point of view.
But the thing is, Paul, is just think how many believers they could have retained if they hadn't pushed the young Earth creationism.
Well, I mean, the young Earth creationist thing is an extreme end. It's like the Taliban of Christianity. This is what it is.
Not so, Paul. Because don't forget, I went to a what do you call it, Church of England school, and they taught you fucking Adam and Eve, and they taught you Noah and things like that.
Oh, they taught you Adam and Eve and things like that, but they didn't necessarily teach. Because I too went to a Church of England school. The first secular educational establishment I ever went to was university. My first school was the Church of England school. My middle school, Church of England school. High school, Church of England school. A levels was cathedral school. All things. So yeah, I was slowly working up the grade. Of the various different churches, and university was the first secular establishment I went to. And yeah, they do teach you the Adam and Eve story and all the godisms and things like that, but they were rather loose on the 6,000 years thing. That seems to be peculiarly something that seems to have come over from America with this creationist woo that we're actually seeing.
When I was growing up, I also went to a Christian secondary school, but with those, they actually invited people in from the local Christian Creationist group, and actually we had Creationist assemblies.
Wow.
So, yeah, and I wasn't taught anything about evolution in my entire school career.
Yeah, I've got two questions about, like, go back to, let me just jump back to Usher for a moment. Okay, now he comes up with this date. Now, at that time, were there any scientists or geologists or anything? Was there anything showing up in their studies that was saying a young Earth at that time?
Nope, not
And-
at all.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay. Now, also,
was-
one other question. I'll let you have it, Becky. I know it'll be good.
Okay. Yeah.
But
Okay.
my understanding is that the actual young Earth movement and bringing the science in and stuff is like real recent, like what, 50, 100 years maybe, if that.
Yeah. Yeah.
No.
Now, I mean, I'm just curious because I don't really
I know.
know.
Okay, first of all, when was Usher? Wasn't that the 1700s, 18th century?
1600.
1600.
16, okay, it was over. Okay. Science did not exist until the middle of the 19th century, the 1800s. The discipline of science did not exist, yes. Even Darwin's bulldog, Huxley, I can't remember the quote exactly. He said something like the word scientist sounded as bad to him as the word cannibal, something like that.
Yeah,
Or
don't forget that.
geologist or
Hang on, no, the natural philosophy. But as
Yes,
such,
that's
Newton,
what I
that
was-
was
that-
in the 1700s, wasn't it?
Yes, that's
Well-
where I was going, Wayne. If there was no such thing as science, there were no such thing as scientists. There were natural philosophers, and there were naturalists. And one of the arguments you often hear about Darwin is that he wasn't a scientist. Well, there weren't any. He was a naturalist. Most naturalists at that time were people who were comfortable, upper classes, and
Yeah.
But you also had mathematicians as well, which was separate.
1900s.
Which was separate
Yeah.
to the natural philosophers, and they stem back from Newton, because you've got Newton, you've got all these wonderful people. You've got Euler, who was a tremendous mathematician and a tremendous physicist. Although, as you said, the word wasn't used, but they didn't talk in terms of science, or they spoke of in terms of like mechanics and fluid dynamics, and that's what was talked about. So all these subjects, which were different but could be analysed using mathematical techniques, they existed from Newton onwards. So you get some wonderful people doing this fantastic work. Lagrange, for example, Laplace, wonderful French mathematicians did some absolutely superb stuff. They called themselves mathematicians rather than natural scientists.
And also, Matt, is that they were pursuing what we would now call the scientific method, i.e., they were running their ideas down several times, rather than pulling things out their arse and publishing them.
And many early many early naturalists were in fact
which is what I do, Wayne.
Yeah.
I mean,
But as I said, many early naturalists, what we would think of as scientists today, first of all, they didn't stick to like one particular discipline like we think of now. Science has changed dramatically in 150 years. But these people necessarily confined themselves to one field of study. They saw them as integrated, and many early naturalists were priests and ministers.
Yeah. No, but I can't remember where I got this from. It could well have been one of Fiona's hangouts, or it could have been Wildwood Clare. But apparently there were no geologists until was it something like the 19th century, and they were actually religious people who went out looking for proof of creation.
Yes.
And ended up finding proof of an old Earth.
Right. Well, there were still people who did
found evolution.
Sorry, say again?
Darwin was the same thing. He was going out just doing studying stuff. He wasn't going out to prove evolution.
Yeah.
That's the conclusion he arrived at after his studies, I think.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's as I said, the people were investigating geology, but they weren't geologists. People were investigating because even if you go back to Aristotle, Aristotle discovered how octopuses mate. And for about 1,000 years, people said he was wrong until somebody actually investigated and went, "Oh yeah, he was right." because that's what people did. That was what natural philosophy was, to explore the natural world. But they didn't limit it quite the same way we do. Natural philosophy could include music and art and architecture to a certain extent, because you're dealing with mathematics. Music is all mathematical relationships. So it wasn't quite as. So I don't really know what things were like right then back in Usher. I know more about the 19th century. Yeah.
So as far as modern science, how long ago did the creationism thing start?
That's
what I was wondering as well.
Okay.
That was
not necessarily modern science, but creationism. In the early 1900s here in the United States, actually part of it comes from Los Angeles, oddly enough, a group of ministers and people were concerned that Christians weren't studying the right kind of Christianity. So they came up with this group of essays, and they published a group of essays, and it's called The Fundamentals of Christianity. This is where we get the term fundamentalist from this book. And this is, we've always had fundamentalism to a certain extent, because we always had these people living in the mountains with only a Bible and interpreting things the way they could. So there were always people who were semi-literate, shall we say, out in the backwoods interpreting things the way they would. But it didn't really become a movement until that time, until the Fundamentals of Christianity was published, and they started to promulgate this. So fundamentalism, as we think of it, the young Earth creationism, as we think of it, as a movement, only dates back to the early 20th century.
Oh, okay.
And also, I'm sorry. What do you want to be calling the hangout? Is it Becky, or is it the other name?
My real name's Jade, you know that, but it's okay.
Yeah.
I
read something recently that actually said, it could well be in the book I'm reading at present actually, that fundamentalism didn't start as being Bible, as like heavily conservative Bible inerrantists. It was actually something that didn't. Where's the damn book? So more I don't know, more liberal, more open to naturalistic ideas, and it was only corrupted into the fundamentalism we see now.
I think perhaps what you're referring to is sort of the early Baptist type movement, where people accepted that everyone should interpret the Bible according to themselves. And then that changed quite radically from people saying, yes, here's the Bible, you should interpret it for yourself, that's what we think is so very important, to no, you have to interpret it exactly the way we do. And that, I think, dates to the publication of the Fundamentals of Christianity.
I found the passage in this book.
Oh, okay, good.
Right.
What's the book, by the way?
The book is The Family, The Secret Fundamentalism at the Heart of American Power by Jeff Charlotte.
Oh, okay. Okay, yes, I'm familiar with the book.
It just dropped open at the passage, funnily enough. Right, goes, and it's not even marked. Right, fundamentally, God must have done it. Fundamentalist is, in itself, a relatively recent and much contested word, coined early in the last century by a conservative Baptist who wanted to clear away the confusion about what Christians, by his lights, were supposed to stand for. What this stood for, in fact, was confusing. One of the biggest surprises to be found in the Fundamentals, a series of dense pamphlets published between 1910 and 1915, is the argument that evolution is reconcilable with the literal reading of Scripture. Much has changed since then, such is the evolution of American fundamentalism. Imagine it travelling a path twisted like that of a Mobius strip, the visual paradox made popular in M.C. Escher's Optical Illusions, from liberation to authoritarianism. American fundamentalism's original sentiments were as radically democratic in theory as they have become repressive in practice. Its dream not that of a Christian theocracy, but of a return to the first century of Christ worship before there was a thing called Christianity, the age of miracles when church was no more than a word for the great fellowship, the profound friendship of believers, when Christ's testament really was new, revelation was unburdened by history, and believers were martyrs or martyrs to be pure and beautiful.
That I didn't know that, and that's interesting because I've only read a little bit of the Fundamentals of Christianity, and I can tell you the essays kind of range all over the place. but that again, that doesn't surprise me because, as you said, he was a Baptist minister, and the Baptists originally went to like personal interpretation of the Bible, but that's changed quite a bit since then. It's it's been a great, great.
Yeah, I found that an interesting passage when I read it.
Yeah, that is very interesting, and I'll have to go back and look more at the fundamentals of Christianity. But it said it's essays by a lot of different people that they put together in the book, and they were trying to get some sort of Christian, creed, so to speak, some statement of what Christians should believe, because people were all over the place. And I think at that time, that was around the time of the Third Great Awakening. We had these several different Great Awakenings here in the United States, which were periods of religious fervor.
Yeah,
and
I've read
they're
that.
absolutely
I've read that in
fascinating.
the book.
And I'm not going to go there because I could be there all day.
Yeah.
But there may be 4 Great Awakenings, by the way. Most people think that the 60s were the 4th. But it really not only changed America, it changed the entire world. There were these periods of religious upheaval in which new ideas came up and changes occurred. But yeah, I don't want to get too far into that.
Yeah, that's a good. It's a good subject for another hangout, mind you, though, Jay.
It's a great subject, the Great Awakenings, yeah, especially the middle two, the second and third.
Yeah, before we get back to Age of the Earth and stuff, I did look up and it said the modern form of Homo sapiens. I guess that would be Cro-Magnon, I guess.
Well, no. Okay, can I say?
Well, it just said the modern form of Homo sapiens first appeared about 100,000 years ago.
Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Cro-Magnon is only refers to a group of people living in a particular area at a time. It's like a social group. An anthropological grouping. People who lived in Europe at a certain time. It's not a scientific term at all.
You do see it in certain school type text though. You do see it used as a.
And they really should explain what it means. Basically, it's a bit like saying the Mayas.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The Mayas lived in a certain place at a certain time and had a certain culture. Cro-Magnon were just Homo sapiens that lived in a certain place in Europe at a certain time, and they had a certain culture. It should probably be always followed by culture. Cro-Magnon culture.
Okay.
There's a lot of confusion about what it is.
Yeah, I just found that term, Cro-Magnon culture, estimated age 32,000 years. Location, Vogelherd, Germany. It's where they have wall painted cave art and stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was another.
So let me ask another question. William Lane Craig, for instance, I know he's an old Earth guy. I've never heard him say as much, but does he think that Adam and Eve still happened, but a long time ago?
I don't know, but I know a lot of old Earth creationists take the point of view that evolution happened, and we evolved. Homo sapiens evolved from apes, and we still are apes. I mean, we evolved from a common ancestor with other apes. But at a certain point, God put the souls in, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that's where the creation comes from. It's not that God literally took dirt and created human beings, although there are some old Earth creationists who do believe that. They're fine with evolution, but then they say, well, God used the same pattern to physically, magically make humans, Adam and Eve. So there's 2 different points of view there that I know of. Yeah.
Going back to your William Lane Craig comment, Wayne, you can find on YouTube what he actually is. He accepts what he refers to as microevolution, but is unwilling to accept macroevolution.
So he believes in special creation, but a long time ago. Is that what he's saying?
I think so. Yes.
The way that they rationalize it, that I've seen it done, is.
Oh, one sec, Paulo. Be careful when you say they, because now you might be talking about Fiona.
No.
No, he means fundamentalists.
I'm talking about young age creationists, because I was actually going to just follow that up by saying, because not every Christian is a young earth creationist, and I do have this kind of conversations with people who aren't. young Earth creationists. But the way that the old age creationists often reconciles this is that there are two creation stories in Genesis. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are two separate creation stories. And one of them is one that can go off into antiquity. And the other one is a specific event with specific people. Because, of course, the question always does arise is who was Adam and Eve's kids' wives? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Cain, Abel.
yeah. Who are their wives?
Well, one of them died, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
One killed the other.
Supposedly after having children.
Yeah. And then there
Cain,
was Seth, I
Cain
think, was one.
killed Abel.
Yeah, so who was Cain's wife? Because he went and he raised... He went over to... I can't remember what the hell they call the place.
Yeah.
Land and
yeah,
Nod,
Land
that's
and
right.
Nod.
Bedland. He went over there and he went and reared a lineage of evil men that get talked about. But who was his wife? And this is where the old age creationists will turn around and say that, well, the first creation story talks about creating humans. And the second creation story specifically talks about creating Adam and Eve in the garden and all the animals in the garden. That's why it seems also messed up. And that's where, and the Adam and Eve bit can happen 6,000 years ago, and that's where men had souls. But prior to that, in between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, humans didn't have souls. And that's because otherwise, when you bring evolution into it, you have to turn around and say, well, if men evolved from monkeys, at what point did men get souls? Otherwise, we're going to have to turn around and say that all dogs go to heaven.
Well, maybe they do. That was actually a discussion in my Catholic school. And the answer was, we have no idea.
Exactly. You end up with a mythology that is a little bit twisted, and you start having silly questions that get asked, like, well, if we did evolve, where did the soul evolve? Where did that bit get inserted? And are you talking about a human, the first human, but their parents didn't have souls?
Oh, about the dogs. Oh, no, I was going to say about the dogs. Let's see. They say that the humans are body, spirit, and soul. The body plus the spirit makes a living soul, if I remember correctly. Animals are body and spirit, but no soul. And somewhere in the Bible, I can't remember, and I ain't going to swear to it, but it seemed like I remember saying something about animal spirit returns to God when they die. Whatever that is. Maybe it's life force or energy or something.
Yeah,
just throwing that out there.
Well, what we discussed in, as you said, in my Catholic high school was the Bible doesn't speak of it. So who knows? Can I bring us back to potassium-argon dating?
Yeah, let's go there.
Okay, because this is actually a subject I'm fond of. I'm not an expert in it by any means, but I am fond of it because I've read quite a bit about it. There is a gentleman called G. Brent Dalrymple who is an expert in, he's expert in radiometric dating, but he's doing a lot about potassium-argon dating. And nowadays, they really don't use potassium-argon dating anymore, as far as I know. They use argon dating because it's better. But Dalrymple has written a number of books and has a couple of papers about potassium-argon dating. They're very interesting. I brought up one, I think, in another hangout where I was pointing out that Answers in Genesis has this table that they have had there since 2001, and it has the wrong dates for certain volcanic eruptions. They put in the wrong dates, they copied in the wrong column, but they referenced Dalrymple's paper, and which I have, as well as several of his books. But one of the arguments, there's a couple of arguments against radiometric dating that they bring up, and one of them is that they bring up this table, and they bring up other works of Dalrymple, where he's gotten the dates certain volcanic eruptions. And they say, well, you see, you've got this eruption, and we know when it happened. For instance, they look at Mount Hulali, Mount Lassen in 1915, Mount Etna. We know the dates that those were. And they will look at this and they will say, but you see, they're getting like 250,000 years, which, again, as I said, they copied from the wrong column. But nevertheless, you know, it's like 100,000 years old, and yet we know when Mount Etna erupted. We know when Mount Hulali erupted, things like that. And they're saying, you see, these are the dates that he's getting, and he's the expert. So how, it'll show you how bad radiometric dating is. Well, it'd be really helpful if they actually read his books, because there's a couple of problems. One of which that Honorable talks about a lot are called inclusions. What are inclusions? Well, it kind of should be obvious to anybody who understands that the word inclusion comes from the word included. What happens when lava flows is, I mean, we've all seen pictures, movies, and like, and even real live pictures in National Geographic shows and stuff. Lava flows downhill, and it picks up all these other rocks, right? And it does melt the rocks and things like that. But you end up with little bits of other stuff in the rock. Yes. So if you're not...
You also get solid rock, such as olivine, which has erupted from deep down. It exists as a solid, even at those high temperatures.
That's right. That's right. I'd forgotten about that. You're absolutely right.
Fossil age as well.
Right. So you get these inclusions in the rock, which are bits. You think of a chocolate chip cookie. Think of the chips of a chocolate chip cookie, which are not the rock that was just formed by the volcano. Rocks, as Fiona, that were brought up from deep within the earth within the eruption, and rocks that are picked up along the way by the lava flowing downhill. And if you aren't careful in your preparation, you will get the inclusions in your sample, and your date will be off. The thing is, the geologists don't just run out in the field, pick up a rock, and date it. They actually look at the rock that they're dating, not just externally, but cutting into it and looking at samples under a microscope. There's a whole field that involves looking at rocks under a microscope. And to see what it looks like, because you can sometimes see these inclusions. And they don't just test one rock, they test a whole bunch of them. So yes, sometimes you're going to get the wrong dates. And sometimes it's going to be because of inclusions. And sometimes it's going to be because of a couple of other things that I can't remember right now, but it involves Assite and Mount Lassen. Okay. Apologies for forgetting. It's just slipping out of my mind at the moment. So you have to look at that. There's another problem that they're missing. There's a couple of them, actually. Dr. Stephen Austin, who is actually has legitimate PhD in geology, is a creationist, and he went to Mount St. Helens, and he got some samples, and he prepared them, and he sent them to this lab, Geocron Labs, to be tested. And of course, he came up with dates that are way wild. You know, so see, potassium argon dating doesn't work because look how old. The results say that these samples from Mount St. Helens are, and we know when Mount St. Helens erupted. Well, problem number one with this is Geocron Labs at that time could not do potassium argon dating on anything younger than a million years. They said they couldn't. It was on their website. It was in their literature. They said they couldn't do it. And yet Austin sends these samples to that lab. He's either the stupidest geologist in the world or that was a deliberate fraud. That's my opinion. Now, why couldn't they test the samples? Okay. Apparently, the equipment they were using retained some argon gas in it after each test. Yes. So what's happening is if you're testing, I don't know how much argon gas was left in it, but if you're testing something that's 30 years old, and what you're really doing is you're not testing the sample that's 30 years old, you're testing the argon gas that remained in the system. You're likely to get an answer of 10,000 years or 100,000 years. So you're not testing the sample, you're testing the argon gas. And I know that Paul has talked about something like this in the talking about the carbon in diamonds. I think it was carbon-14 a long time ago. Yeah, you'd mentioned something like that. So they couldn't they weren't testing Mount St. Helens sample. They were testing the argon gas that retained in the sample. The other thing is I did quite a bit of research looking at various potassium argon tests, and most of the tests showed a probability range of between plus or minus 100,000 years and plus or minus 250,000 years. What that means is, so if you do a potassium argon test and it says something's 10 million years old, depending on which equipment you're using, I guess, that's the part I was not quite sure of. I'm guessing it was the equipment or the way the equipment is used. You're going to get a range of plus or... Pardon?
Sensitivity of the equipment.
Oh, it is the sensitivity of the equipment.
Yeah,
I was guessing it was the equipment. Yeah.
If you're measuring a very, very low level of something,
right,
obviously your error bars are going to be huge.
Right.
But the sensitivity of the equipment is going to determine where your cutoff point is going to be.
I see. That makes sense.
Yeah, and different mass specs would have different thresholds below which they would say this is unreliable.
Right. But so if you test it, so you're going to get some samples I saw were plus or minus 100,000 years, some were plus or minus 250,000 years, some in between. So if you're measuring, you get a measurement of something that's 10 million years old, plus or minus 100,000 years, plus or minus 250,000 years is particularly relevant, especially since potassium argon dating is used for old rock. Okay, so plus or minus 100 to 250,000 years is irrelevant. Okay, so let's go back to Mount St. Helens. It was 30 fucking years old. Testing with potassium argon dating was stupid to begin with.
Oh, he knew that though.
Just one sec.
He knew that.
When you said,
he knew that, yes.
When you said that Mount St. Helens was 30 years old, surely the rock wouldn't be.
Yeah, remember, potassium argon dating is telling you when the rock was last molten.
Right.
Now, we actually watched Mount St. Helens erupt.
Yeah.
So when it came out, that was when it was last molten.
Right. Okay.
And so
Yeah,
that
and then it solidified, making it 30 years old or so.
Yeah.
So the main points are...
That's how old it was from the time it solidified.
Right, I'm with you.
Right. And
I thought about the actual inherent material.
No,
about the age of the material. So
No,
how would you find that? How would you find the age of that material?
Would you? Well, basically when matter formed in the universe.
Well, yeah. That's
going to be it. But no, that's what that dating method is telling you, when it was last molten. And if you get a rock and you date it, and it says this rock was last molten 4 billion years ago, then you know the planet's got to be at least 4 billion years old.
I was just missing something. Thanks for the clarification.
However, what Steve Austin did was he did not tell the laboratory what the sample was.
Yeah.
Right.
Neither did he sort his sample correctly. It was still full of contaminants.
Yeah.
The laboratory said on its website that anything younger than a certain age would give erroneous results.
Right.
But he still submitted the sample, knowing that the results that came out were wrong.
Is that the one that was sent coated in shellac?
No, you're thinking dinosaur bones.
That's a dinosaur bone. That's a different one.
That's a carbon 14 of a dinosaur bone.
Yeah,
It's actually covered in shellac.
But to me, this is the level of fraud that they will. It's the wrong dating method to begin with, and he knew damn well that it was the wrong dating method because he does have a legitimate PhD from a real university. On top of which, the Geochron lab said they couldn't test anything. It was on their website, that they couldn't test anything that age. So in my opinion, this was a deliberate fraud perpetrated by Stephen Austin in order to try to bolster young creationism.
Yes. It was.
And it's a freaking lie from beginning to end. And this is just exactly how low they will stoop to try to support their point of view. And there's no need for it. There just isn't. There's no need to try to falsify, make a mockery of science in that way. Yeah. And it's the same thing with even though Dalrymple did do these testings on earlier volcanoes like Mount St. Elias in 1915 and Mount Hualali and Mount Etna. One of the reasons that they do tests on these is to try to see how carefully they can measure things that they know really don't fit that method.
Yeah.
But he's got books on it, for goodness sakes. You can read the books and find out what he actually says and how the testing is done and why it isn't accurate and what the potential problems are and so on and so forth. But instead what these folks do is they take out the little part that they like. And in the case of that table used from his paper, not only did they take out the part they liked, they copied from the wrong column.
Yeah, you showed that too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right, Tonya in the Hangout chat, I don't know what they call it, the thing that works behind this system.
Yeah.
Posted the comment which I've copied into the sidebar.
Yeah, I see that.
Okay.
So if you want to take a look at that.
Right. That's all to do with minerals coming out of solution.
Oh, yeah. Can I?
It's nothing to do with molten rock.
No. Yeah.
The potassium and dating method works on that time since molten. Stalactites and stalagmites, we're talking about the precipitation of minerals from solution.
Coming from the ceiling, not the floor.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you can get them from the floor. Stalactites. Yeah, stalactites cling tightly to the roof. Stalagmites might grow to the roof. That's how you remember.
Push up with all their minds.
Stalactite clings tightly.
Fiona, I'm presuming
explain this?
that she's not wanting to confuse that between the ages of rocks. I think she's just introducing it as a general comment.
But,
and can I?
Yeah, but she asked for some thoughts. And I'm just going to explain about how you can end up with this great big piece of what appears to be like stone very, very quickly. If you take a salt solution and you start dripping it on a hot plate, the water is evaporating off and you're getting left with salt crystals. And you keep going drop, 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 drop. You're going to get a bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger pile of salt. Because the water's evaporating off, leaving the salt behind. That's how we end up with big salt plains, Bonneville Flats, etc. That's how we get soda lakes. It's evaporation and crystallization. So it's the water coming out, so it's dissolved substances coming out of solution.
And they're coming out of saturated solutions as well, so it's happening even quicker.
Can I give you a real life example?
Yeah.
Okay, I used to live in a place called Silverado Canyon in Southern California. And our water came from a spring, literally. I actually followed the pipe all the way back, and it literally stuck into the mountainside. That's where my water came from. It was great water, I thought. So my parents bought this place in about 1962, okay? By the time I lived there, which was 10 years later, well, actually less than 10 years later, like 1971, I lived there myself in their cabin. We had taken up these, your standard tea kettles, right? Metal tea kettles. And we used the tea kettles all the time for making coffee and tea and whatever. By the time that I lived in the canyon, those tea kettles were coated on the bottom, inside, with calcium carbonate.
Yes.
Okay? And because I was kind of rough on tea kettles, I'd kind of slam them down, and it would occasionally break up, and you'd pour a cup of coffee, and there'd be these little bits of calcium carbonate formed. And the creek near us, because this is really heavy water, so it had a lot of dissolved minerals in it. The creek near us, you could see where the water went under the bridge. There was this about 1 foot coating of calcium carbonate. But it's not rock. But it kind of, if people didn't know what they were looking at, they could say it's rock. It's the same as, people say, oh, look, there's a hat that was fossilized. No, it's filled with minerals, and it's like calcium carbonate. Again, when you have heavy water, it has all these dissolved minerals in it, and they will do exactly, what I mentioned. They will absorb into the hat. They will coat the bottom. Because every time we heated the water, you know, the water evaporating off left the calcium carbonate behind. I still have a couple of those coffee pots with a calcium carbonate coating on the bottom. It's
Quick
not
question for you.
We've
If
all
you
had to do a kettle or an iron. We all know that with your iron, you should actually use deionized water to prolong its life.
For you. If you got a piece of meat and you dripped the supersaturated calcium carbonate on it, and or salt, and encased it in, I don't know, minerals, buried it, and dug it up, I don't know, 65 million years later, would it have viable protein material in it?
Oh, pain. No, it wouldn't.
Airlock.
Yeah.
But they are just to cover what you were saying, Wayne. What they've discovered is they are finding that some proteins last longer than they thought, and they're finding remnants of protein in older bones. And but they're not viable.
It's all right.
It's just I know that killed me. I know that killed me when he kept saying viable. No, what do you mean by viable anyway? You can make a protein in the lab. Does that make it viable?
Viable for what?
It didn't make any sense. He kept saying viable.
He seemed to think the protein needs to be active for an antibody to bind to it. All that needs to be active is the antibody. It doesn't matter what the antigen is doing. There are people who have allergies to gold, to nickel, to water. They're not viable.
Yeah.
And so he seemed to think it's got to be an active protein if an antibody sticks to it. No.
Yeah, that was...
He thought that the protein was active, in an active form. No, it's nonsense. It's nonsense.
Okay, can I bring us back to subject? Oh, go ahead, Paul. I was going to bring us back.
I was just going to bring us back. I was going to bring us back and take us further back.
Okay.
Because what we have been talking about so far, is discrediting creationist claims that the Earth is 6,000 years old by talking about radioactive dating methods that place rock that you'll find in your garden way, way further back than that. But that doesn't actually give us the age of the Earth, because the original Earth, the original Earth's surface, as it was, as it formed at the time, it's highly possible that a good portion of that is now the moon.
Yeah.
As a result of a possible collision with another planetoid. But at the time, even after that, you're looking at the Great Bombardment, where the Earth was pummeled and pummeled and pummeled and pummeled. So there is very little early rock left. There is still some.
Well, that's why I emphasise the point that when you work this out and the rock was last molten at however long ago, that gives you a minimum age for the Earth.
Yeah. However,
it's the oldest rock that you have found, but that doesn't mean that the Earth isn't older. It means it can't be younger.
Absolutely, and this is what I mean. We've been talking about how the Earth can't not be younger than set dates, but how do we arrive at the age of the Earth? Now, the creationists, they arrive at the age of the Earth by counting backwards to through generations, which dumb. But actually finding the age of the Earth is a little bit more complex than that, and you have to look not at the Earth, because there is no longer any original Earth surface on there, but you and if you presume that for the first however long, however many millions, possibly billions of years, the surface of the Earth could have been molten, you have to look into space, and you have to look at meteorites, and I believe you are looking at things like zircons, because I think they're zircon crystals. They're like like seriously
Yeah.
hard stuff, and when they're like the oldest things on the planet, older in some cases, older than the planet. And what you look for are these inclusions. I think it's lead or something in zircon crystals, and if you can work out how much lead is in there, on the principle that we've already talked about, that lead is a stable daughter product of uranium, uranium decomposition, radioactive decomposition of uranium, you can work out how old that particular crystal is. And that's how we know that these zirconium crystals, these zircon crystals, are billions of years old.
Yeah, I found a date for that, about 4.3 billion years.
And that's how they worked it out. And I believe it was at the time, it was, I can't remember what his name was, but it's a relatively recent thing. But the quest to find out an accurate age of the Earth by measuring the lead within zircons, highlighted how polluted the environment is with lead, because the amounts are so incredibly tiny that even a car going past at the time with lead additives in the fuel would skew the results. And I believe it was like the subject of one of the recent Cosmos things, which is why it springs to mind. I can't remember the names, guys. There's a big gold star to whoever can stick in the comments the name of the guy. But that's how they arrived at the age of the Earth, as opposed to the last time that rock on its surface was molten.
Well, another thing, it's related to the topic, is that, right, these creationists, they say that, well, they won't provide a mechanism other than that God spoke it into existence. God said it was so, and then it happened. Right? As in everything else, they won't provide a mechanism.
No, can't.
Right?
Nope.
Yeah. But, right, they say that the Bible was divinely inspired. God spoke through men. The Bible was so. But he didn't see fit to include the quantum mechanics, the great physics,
the general relativity, the fluid dynamics, thermodynamics.
Right. So I'm going somewhere. Let's see if you can preempt where I'm going with this. Right. So, how come the scientists who are coming up with these mechanisms, why are they the evil atheists? And why aren't they, in the eyes of the creationists, the divinely inspired men who are receiving the mechanism, the information of the mechanism?
That was pretty profound.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that is the thing is, not all scientists are atheists. Remember that.
Yeah.
So this is the thing. I mean, why can't God's revelation be via science? Why got to be using this old text?
Yeah.
You know, this is what I don't get.
Exactly.
One of the greatest scientists of all time, or chemists of all time, Mendeleev, came up with the idea of benzene in a dream. The actual structure of what benzene is.
Oh yeah.
In a dream, so you could interpret that as being divinely inspired. If you
and I'd like.
Go on.
I was just going to say I'd like to point out that St. Augustine, 1,500 years ago, and yes, I know I always end up going to St. Augustine. You spend 3 months with him and you get obsessed. 1,500 years ago, St. Augustine pointed out that he learned from two great books, the book of the Bible and the book of nature. and that there was no conflict between them because they were both the product of God. And one of the things he said is that if you find that there is a conflict between your understanding of nature, or science as we would say today, and your interpretation of the Bible, you need to take a second look at your interpretation of the Bible.
Yeah.
You need to take a second look at your understanding of nature as well, but you need to take a second look at the Bible. He also said that no Christian should be afraid, I forget the exact quote, but basically he said no Christian should be afraid to take any part of the Bible figuratively.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and that was 1,500 years ago.
Yeah.
So
That's why it's such a modern phenomenon, this
Yes.
Idea of having to read it absolutely literally and going with what I can only describe as a lot of science denying nonsense.
Oh, but hold
Right.
on though, Fiona. It's not just. It's not. We're not talking just about American young
No.
Earth creationists here. Don't forget, throughout the last 2,000 years of history, that any deviation will liable to get you burned to the stake.
Yeah.
Not really.
In some places, yes.
In some places, yeah, but if you look at the history of science, you'll find out that the church was in the forefront of it. I mean, after all, it's the church that developed the universities. The entire university system comes from the Catholic Church. So that it's not quite, yes, you are right in certain places, and in some cases it can be because of a small group of people like the
I wasn't
flagellants.
specifically on about in relation to science there, on
Yeah.
about for just the ordinary Joe who questioned the fucking village priest, for instance.
Well, yeah, the ordinary Joe questioning the village priest probably didn't question the village priest, but yeah, I see what you're talking about, yeah. And you can just look at the Salem witch trials for that to a certain extent. All you had to do is go against the grain, and the next thing you know, they're killing you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it happened in a small, but it depends on whether you're talking about whether it happened in a small group, like with the Salem witch trials.
The point I'm making, Jade, is that it's in every case it's the fear of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
It's the fear of knowledge in every case.
Well, but if you look back at, again, the university system, they used to have, I wish Richard, the Abominable History Man, were here, because he knows a lot more about this than I do. I brought up the subject once. But they used to have these great debates, like in the town square, so to speak. I don't know exactly where they held them. But during these debates, the laws against blasphemy were taken away, and students from the universities would argue all sorts of subjects. And you had everybody from town coming to listen to it. It was like a sporting event. You had the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. They'd all come and listen to it, and they got really fierce, and sometimes there were even battles in the streets.
Don't forget that the people instigating those debates were fairly protected by their status. Throughout history, the rich have always had a slight level of protection.
They weren't the rich.
Oh, come on, the people in universities.
No, they weren't always the rich. They came out of the monasteries and sometimes were very poor. It wasn't necessarily the rich. Because remember, the university system was set up to train priests originally. Mm-hmm. And whoever showed a talent likely ended up in the university. It wasn't just the rich.
No,
but you're right, they were protected. They were protected by being part of the university, not necessarily by being rich.
Exactly.
Well, I also... talking about being rich, you've got the Cathars as well, which were exterminated by the Catholic Church as well.
Right, and you also have to remember that the church sent emissaries to the Cathars, and the Cathars killed every single one of them. So they were both complete assholes, both sides.
Yeah.
Wayne, I mean, he was talking about pretty recent.
It's ideologies having a big barney, and rather than stopping and listening to what the other one has to say, just taking out the big stick with a nail in the end, like I do.
Yeah,
I mean, that's all it is, and the problem with that is that does breed closed-mindedness. I mean, one of the reasons I do this is because I like to get the science out there.
Right. And could I just kind of mention one thing? I don't have the reference here right in front of me, but it's from Dr. Crap, I just went blank. Anyway, during there was Pope John the 21st, I think it was. He was only a pope for a short time because he was a scientist as well, a naturalist, okay, as well as being a pope, and they built him an observatory. Unfortunately, graft being just as bad way back then as it is now, the observatory was poorly built, collapsed, and killed him. But he started this process of looking into what was being taught at the universities because he was very displeased with certain things being taught. And it ended up in a group of edicts about what you could teach. And I know a lot of people always say, oh, yeah, they're restricting things. No, it was the exact opposite. Because in the universities, they were saying things like, well, this could not have happened, that could not have happened. And what they were told is you can't teach that because you cannot put limitations on the work of God.
Yeah.
God can do anything. And the example that Dr. Principe, I think, I'm not sure if that's the right pronunciation, one of the examples he gave was the idea of life on other planets. Mm-hmm. The professors in the universities were saying, well, of course there's no life on other planets. There's just life here. God made us. We're special. And after this, they started to speculate about life on other planets. In some ways, of course, it was religious speculation. For instance, did Jesus die for people on other planets as well as us? Is Rome on other planets? But the point is that opened up, that change right there, opened up investigation to knowledge, and I can't think of the right word I want to use right now, because this was removed. But that didn't come from the church. That came from the professors with their narrow minds, who were saying, no, this can't be, that can't be, that can't be. And the church came and said, you can't teach that because you cannot put limitations on the work of God. So you have to look at all these things are possible, and it just opened a whole world of investigation at that particular point. And anyone wants to know more about it, let me know, and I'll actually look it up and find the complete reference.
Yeah. I think it's very easy to lay the blame for just about everything at the feet of the church. But I don't think that that's actually fair. I think that is, in a way, sort of missing the target slightly. It's not the church itself, it's not the faith itself. It's certain expounders on matters of faith who have decided that they know everything. They understand the Bible better than any other person in the whole wide world, and that they know the mind of God better than God himself. And they will then tell you that. And they will say that, well, if science contradicts part of the Bible, the science has got to be wrong because I said so. Right. Because it's the word of God. And so it goes on and on and on. And you've got to also remember that many of those people who take it as literally as that have this very strange way of looking at the Bible. Now, they say the Bible is the Word of God, but then they go to John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then they take that bit and they say, well, if the Word was God, then the Word of God was God. Therefore, the Bible is God. They actually idolize the Bible. They're guilty of bibliolatry. They think God is the Bible.
Right.
I've actually asked a couple of people a facetious question and got an answer that shocked me. When I asked, oh, have you built a little shrine for your Bible to live in at home? And they've said yes.
Oh, good.
Because being the Word of God, and the fact that the Word is God, means the Bible is God himself. And when you have somebody who is saying that, then one, they've misunderstood John 1:1. I think it's John.
Well,
yes.
And they're also not going to be corrected in any way, shape, or form. And anything that contradicts what is written down in that book must be wrong, and they will not entertain it.
Fiona, this brings it down to an interest, to a particular what's the word? Little thesis of mine, mini thesis, in that I say, when people say, well, what would prove God to you? And I said, well, I don't know, something like, I don't know, I am here in the sky, rearranging the stars. But a good example would be for if this, as a gesture, God decided that all Bibles were magic, i.e. they were totally indestructible volumes, and they flew, they hovered above the ground, for instance, right? Now the thing is, if the Bible was God, why hasn't it got supernatural powers?
Yeah, you will find very, very, very few Christians will say that the Bible itself is God himself. Very few Christians will make that claim, but there are extremists out there that do that.
Right.
And in fact, I actually encountered somebody in the YouTube's comment section recently who was so offended that I pointed out that in history there have been misprints and transcriptional errors in the Bible, in the texts. And they said, no, there can never be an error in God's perfect word. Now, there's a whole Wikipedia section on errata in the Bible. There is the Adulterer's Bible, where they omitted the word not in thou shalt not commit adultery. There's a version called the Treacle Bible, because the word balm, as in ointment, was, for some peculiar reason, translated as treacle. So it became, is there no treacle in the land of whatever it was? You can actually find some of them are absolutely hilarious, but these were scribe errors, translational errors, and then printers errors.
Not only that, Fiona, right?
I mean, there's the blasphemous comma.
Yeah, and not only errors, right, but doctrinal alterations.
Yes, but I don't want to get into them because what I'm talking about is somebody was saying there can never be a mistake. There cannot be a mistake.
Yeah,
out came an edition that said thou shalt commit adultery.
Yeah, but the point I'm making,
that isn't a mistake.
I'm on about, for instance, in a particular backwater. Let's just say one part of Italy, for instance, you might get every single Bible that were translated in a certain monastery might have had that abbot who got a particular wasp up his arse on a certain subject.
But that's the thing. I don't want to get into. I'm not talking about doctrinal differences here, because that is arguable.
Yes.
Yeah, but we're not talking about doctrinal differences because that is arguable. What I'm talking about is a printer missed out a word.
Yeah.
Right? And person on YouTube comment says that does not exist. It physically cannot exist because the Bible is God and the Word of God and the perfect Word of God. Now he's denying the reality.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
Some of these mistakes that have been made, copies still exist. Hard copies.
Yeah.
And if God was was responsible, then he would be powerful enough to not allow those typos.
No, that's not my point. No, my point is this: these physical copies exist. Yet this person on YouTube comments says they don't.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Right.
They have to go into such denial.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That the copies exist.
Yeah.
Because they worship the word as they think it is. There are people here in the United States who believe that the King James Version was divinely ordained.
Yeah, but I think you might have misunderstood my last point, Fiona, is that they think that God is so powerful, that the word is so powerful that it can't be mistaken. God's too powerful to allow an error in the Bible.
But your problem there is that you're sitting there with hard copies.
That's what I'm saying.
So
it's
not just that they think God is so powerful, they're actually denying the existence of a physical copy that they could go and look at and touch and see. That's the level of denial you're getting to.
Yeah.
And don't even start on translation errors.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. You could show them that until you're blue in the face.
Right.
You could show them a copy with the error in it, and it's sitting in front of them.
No, that's
They
frightening.
will deny that exists sitting on the table in front of them. That's the level of denial I'm talking about.
That is an entirely different level of derp.
Yeah. That's what I'm
and-
getting at. And that's what I meant in a comment section underneath a YouTube video. This person denied that there has ever been a single mistake in the Bible. And we were talking about printer's errors or scribe errors. We're not even quibbling about just translational errors.
Or which books belong in the Bible.
We're not talking about that. I mean, there's even a thing called the blasphemous comma. Where
yes.
Yeah, and it's a. I think a comma was missed out, and it says that along with Jesus were crucified 2 others, comma, miscreants, and they missed out the comma, which makes it, and along with Jesus were crucified 2 other miscreants, which makes Jesus the 3rd miscreant.
Right.
Oh,
That's the blasphemous comma. It was missed out in one of the, I think it's a print run.
And that has actually been used to say that Jesus was a miscreant. That Jesus was
really, when you think logically, considering what he was accused of, he was basically a miscreant in the eyes of the authorities anyway.
Well,
this is a problem. You've got a scribe that's copying down something and he misses out a comma.
Yeah, now I understand what Aaron Ra meant by that. He made a statement, said like there certain like a group is not worshiping God, they're worshiping a book.
Yes.
And what y'all just went over, I understand what he meant now.
Yes. Bart Ehrman, in his debate with Wallace, which is a really good debate, you should hear it, pointed out that some
Who was the Wallace guy?
Bart Ehrman and Dr. Wallace, and I forgot his first name. But if you look at Ehrman and Wallace, I'll find a link if you'd like.
I'll dig it.
Great debate. And Ehrman points out, he says that, now he actually says there, you often hear there are 30,000 errors in the Bible. Ehrman, I think, says 40,000. But the thing is, he points out that most of these are copying errors and are meaningless. For example, he says you might have a scribe, because a lot of scribes were illiterate. They couldn't read. They were just copying.
Yes.
So you might have someone use the same word in a passage 3 times, spell it differently all 3 times.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were basically artists, weren't they?
And he pointed out that it's as bad as student papers today, except today we have spell check, and why don't students use it? It's really very funny when he says it. I'm not doing it right. But yeah, he says that's what the majority of all of these errors are. So when people go on about 30,000 errors in the Bible or 40,000 or whatever, and there is actually someone who tracked them down, and Ehrman mentions the guy's name, and I can't think of it right now, who actually at his time went, looked and found all these different errors and looked at all these different Bibles, and since then they've discovered even more. So when people talk about 30,000 errors in the Bible as if that proves something, all it does is prove that people couldn't spell.
But now I've just put in a link to the Wiki Bible errata.
Okay, good.
And here are a few of them. There's the Bug Bible.
Right.
Where the word bug was used instead of like a ghost or a spectre that haunts. Right. So it ended up as thou shalt not need to be afraid of any bugs by night. There's the Wife Beater's Bible. A footnote to 1 Peter 3:7, inserted by Edmund Beck, reads, "And if she be not obedient and helpful unto him, endeavoureth to beat the fear of God into her head, that thereby she may be compelled to learn her duty and do it." In other words, batter your wife.
Right. I think it's Fiona. You've just said that doctrinal insertions aren't what we're talking about, and that's an example of one.
No, it's not a doctrine. It's a footnote to 1 Peter 3:7, and it's to do with a certain bit that's been translated. The Treacle Bible, is there no treacle in Gilead, which should be balm or medicine?
Yeah.
Now let me see. For the Geneva Bible, there was it the Breeches Bible, where it says, and they sewed fig tree leaves together and made themselves breeches. Adam and Eve wore breeches. There's the Placemakers Bible, which says, blessed are the placemakers instead of the peacemakers. And then in the same one,
You can interpret that to be blessed are the bookies.
Yeah. In Luke 21, the chapter heading says, Christ condemneth the poor widow. It's supposed to say commendeth. Totally different.
So that monk might have had a bit too much mead the following evening.
Yeah. And then there's the other one
Or
that
whoever
says,
was typesetting. You know how typesetting
well, we're
used to
talking
be
the
done.
Geneva Bible here. We're talking about the 1500s. Where ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by David the prophet. It was actually Daniel. There's another one, Gilead comes up again. Rosen, the Rosen Bible. Is there no rosen in Gilead? Rosen's that stuff you put on violin bows and the ends of the tips of ballet shoes.
Yeah.
And
Although here in the United States we call it rosin.
they got this one wrong, and it should have been beeves, B-E-E-V-E-S, which is a plural of beef, right?
Right.
But they got it wrong and put in bees. How the Pacific host must be of bees, sheep, lambs, and goats.
Reminded me of that Oprah Winfrey meme that says, release the bees.
A Pacific host is a peace offering. And that is saying that the peace offerings have to be sheep, lambs, goats, and bees.
The bees!
Right. And this is it. But this is the thing. They are errors that have crept into the Bible. I've just come across the blasphemous comma. There's the Judas Bible. That one has Judas saying, sit ye here while I go yonder and pray. They have Judas saying it, not Jesus. And that's in Gethsemane. There's the Printer's Bible. It's supposed to be princes have persecuted me. It became printers have persecuted me. Printers.
Well, actually, that's quite prescient, that, because as we all know, there is no more unreliable piece of equipment than a printer. They're the bane of my life.
So, but the thing is, they are errors. The copies exist,
Right.
and someone will say there's never been an error in any edition of the Bible, and
That's just delusional.
That is scary, because that is like denying that the sun is in the sky. I mean, come on, I'm Scottish. I don't see the sun very often, but even I know it's there.
I like the sin on Bible, Fiona. The sin on more rather than sin no more, and the vinegar Bible.
Yes, exactly. These mistakes happened, and so to deny them is well, as you said, it's delusional. But when you come up against somebody of that mindset, how on earth are you going to convince them that radiometric dating is valid?
Yeah, you're not.
Yeah.
Just like the people who actually believe that the King James version of the Bible was divinely ordained. They really do believe that, and you can't talk to people like that. You know, they seem to think that the group of people who did the translating were working under. I have this vision of these people at a table translating the Bible with the Holy Ghost above them and the rays coming down. You know, I mean, it just.
Do you know what really amuses me? What really amuses me about the King James proponents is that these are the sort of people who really fucking hate Britain. They're the ones who are like, 1776 guns.
Yes, you're right.
The Alex Jones merchants, and they got this, and yet they hold to this book written by or arranged by a English king.
Right.
It's crazy.
Can I break in something here for go back, because I just realized something that perhaps Wayne kind of didn't know what I was talking about exactly, and maybe other people didn't too, because in a way Wayne was right when he said the rich go to college. I was talking about the medieval university, which was a little different than later. So he's actually right. As time went on, it became mostly only the rich who went to the university. I was talking about an older time, and it was more according to talent. And one of the other things that spread, I don't know, a lot of people don't know this, one of the things that really helped spread knowledge throughout Europe was the development of religious orders. Because before you had religious orders, you had this monastery here, this monastery there, that this, they were all doing their own thing, but they didn't speak to each other. And this is also where you got a lot of craziness going on. If you might look into the, for instance, there was ergot poisoning was fairly common in some monasteries where people just went nuts because ergot, the active ingredient ergot is LSD. So people, you would have an entire convent or monastery overdose on LSD because it's a fungus that grows on rye. Okay. So, but anyway, so when the religious orders developed, what they did was they moved people around. They moved people from this place to that place, and that spread knowledge across Europe. That was, a really interesting thing. And this is where you can say that religion really helped knowledge, helped the spread of knowledge, helped the investigation of knowledge, just as the edicts that came from, and I can't remember who the names, the actual ones, but I do know they came from, Pope John the 21st, that said you can't put limitations on the work of God, so stop saying no. So, this argument that religion was always bad for knowledge or bad for science doesn't really work. It just, you can't take things one-sided or another, as some people want to do.
The thing is, though, Jed, there must have been some things that couldn't be said.
Oh, I'm sure there were. The point I'm making, but there were things that couldn't be said, not because of religion, but because of your king.
Yeah.
Or your lords. That's always existed. So it's not. I've often compared this to ideology. The problem is with ideologies, not necessarily religion per se, and I want to get sidetracked on this, but I used to hang out with the Maoists that lived down the street from me during the 1970s, and I also knew a number of Trotskyite communists. And the Trotskyite communists, the Socialist Workers' Party, these people adhered to their discipline as fervently as fundamentalist Christians do, and I could sit here and draw you parallels to fundamentalism and SWP in the Trotskyite communists, including the end of the world kind of stuff, because they believed the revolution was coming any minute, and they held that with a fervor as these people who think the end of the world is coming any day now because of revelation. So it's those people were all atheists. So it's ideology. It's not necessarily just religion. It just so happens that religion was the predominant ideology. That and worship of the king. And kings said, "Well, it's divine right of kings," which they made up.
Yeah, well, when I talked about rich and that, it's one of the things that it's like that power has always been a great exemptor. For instance, like when people were bound by the Ten Commandments, for instance, and
can I just come in here? We're way off topic again.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of bring it back to
one tiny point, and we'll get back on.
Okay. Please do.
Yeah, the whole point I'm getting at is, like, for instance, like, thou shalt not commit adultery, for instance. When, as a king, not done as he pleases on that score.
Up until his lords took his head off.
Yeah.
And that did happen. But yeah, you're right. But then again, it was his lords taking his head off. So, but one of the things I wanted to bring up is that, because I was looking at this, is the basic processes that take place in the Earth. And when you're talking about a world 6,000 years old, how can it's like saying the plate tectonics had to have taken place kind of like ice skaters, just boom, over here, we're going to move this continent, boom, this is going to move this continent. And I wanted to actually read something as because I was looking up Mount Everest and the Himalayas in the Encyclopedia Britannica, and I just want to read this one paragraph from them to kind of give you an idea. It says, finally, some 20 million years ago, during the early Miocene epoch, the tempo of the crunching union between the two plates increased sharply, and Himalayan mountain building began in earnest. As the Indian subcontinent plate continued to plunge beneath the former Tethys Trench, the topmost layers of old Gondwana metamorphic rocks peeled back over themselves for a long horizontal distance to the south, forming nappes. Wave after wave of nappes thrust southward over the Indian landmass for about as far as 60 miles, 100 kilometers. Each new nappe consisted of Gondwana rocks older than the last. In time, these nappes became folded, contracting the former trench by some 250 to 500 horizontal miles, 400 to 800 kilometers. All the while, down-cutting rivers matched the rate of uplift, carrying vast amounts of eroded material from the rising Himalayas to the plains where it was dumped by the Indus, Ganges, and Brahmaputra rivers. The weight of the sediment created depressions, which in turn could hold more sediment. In some places, the alluvium beneath the Geologic plain now exceeds 25,000 feet, 7,600 meters in depth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now how on earth is creationism going to account for all? Now remember, we can examine these rocks, examine these geologic formations, and find out how these things happened. And this is just one part of the story. I'm reading one paragraph out of the whole article on how, and so this is, you've got the tectonic plates, and I started at the point where the real serious mountain building began, with one tectonic plate going under another. And you've got all the erosion, you've got the rocks folding back, you've got the rocks bunching up, you've got all this stuff happening, you've got the deposits of eroded material, which ends up with us now having 7,600 meters in depth of alluvium beneath the Gangetic plain. Now, how do you account for all of those things, including these 7,600 meters of alluvium during the flood?
Flood. That's what it will be, the flood.
Oh, I know, but it's not.
Because remember, they will argue that the Himalayas were built during the flood. It seems that it's not the flood waters that receded, but the land that rose, basically. We dealt with the flood in the first hangout. The problem is this: if we try to cram in all of the plate tectonics that have gone on into just this 6,000 year period, can you imagine the amount of heat released by friction?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but then they say things like God cooled it.
Yes, I know they do, but they're going to have to show the cooling process. You see, that's the thing. If they want to say God cooled it, if they want to say God caused it, it was a miracle by God, that's fine.
Yeah.
I keep saying this. But when they try and use science to bolster that miracle, that's when they get into the realm of, if you are going to try and use some sort of scientific explanation, then you're going to have to be prepared for those who know the science.
Well, that brings us back to one of my very earliest points. They won't provide the mechanism.
Well, they actually do in they just don't detail the mechanism. Let's put it that way. And that I have to find that lecture from Liberty University. It's on iTunes U. You can look for Liberty University and Earth Sciences, and they give an explanation of how everything happened at the flood, which I wish I'd have watched before we did the flood one. And it goes step by step how. Remember, they actually had real geologists involved in this. They go step by step by how they thought these things happened, and they try to answer every objection. And of course, this little video is only like 13 minutes long, so it's not in detail. The problem is it gets very, very creative. For example, the fountains of the deep were actually volcanic explosions that came up through the ocean. Yeah, that came up through the ocean. It caused the rapid evaporation of the ocean waters, which then went up into the sky. And by the way, what is it? The whatever it is of heaven that came down. They say that was just regular rain. But then added to the regular rain was all of this. But it cooled down because I guess it shot, I don't forget the exact details.
We're away onto the flood again, and we're away from the age of the Earth again.
Yeah, I don't want to. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is to Wayne is that they actually do provide mechanisms. They're just not. They don't go into detail, and they just aren't logical. It's basically there's an objection. I'm going to make up this answer for the objection that sort of makes sense. Oh, there's another objection. I'm going to make up an answer to the objection that sort of makes sense.
The point
Rather
being
than say
that was the point I was trying to make.
Yeah.
that a bad mechanism is no mechanism.
Okay, I'll accept that. We lose Fiona?
Yep, Fiona, it's all yours.
Yeah.
Where's she gone?
If you look at, just to go back to what I was saying, if you look at all those different steps, and remember that's only one portion of the Himalayas coming up. If you look at all those different steps, and you look at them, and you try to stick them in 6,000 years, or even less than 6,000 years, because we have records of the Himalayas at a certain point. So if you try to stick them into that period of time, they would have to happen lickety-split. And yeah, how would the heat? You'd be melting the freaking rocks as you did it. So at some point you would have to say, well, God entered here and corrected this or corrected that. Rather than, as Fiona pointed out, just say it was a miracle and leave it at that. Stop trying to pervert the science to fit your point of view.
I've always preferred to, when talking to a fundamentalist, the ones that really didn't know science, because they'll just say, God did it somehow, I don't really freaking know.
That's fine. I have no problem with that.
Yeah, and believe it or not, I leave them fundies alone because they honestly don't understand science, and they have no clue on science, but they believe God created this. They don't know exactly how, but this is kind of how that they were taught, that it was young Earth. So I don't want to force them out of their young Earth creation position because they're just throwing it all on God, and going with what they believe in God, that's consistent, and I'm not arguing against it. But I was kind of curious, like, I know you had a Catholic background, and I know Fiona does. So you guys kind of think like the flood was like more of a local flood that was like the flood of the century or the millennium or whatever? Okay, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I've always kind of thought about it. And I've always had a little interesting theory, and I saw something on like one of the History Channel program type things about the sea that's above the Mediterranean Sea over by Turkey and Greece, and the
Black Sea?
The Black. They looked at some imagery where the strait is, and they saw some under the water level, like some formation looking like where that might have been a solid wall, and that wall was eroded.
Yeah, that's right.
There is some. Yeah, I think there was a theory that there was like a natural dam there or something that let go. But let's get off the flood and back to. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't really mean to drag you off topic. I was just kind of like,
okay. Let's make ourselves off topic.
I know, but I was just kind of curious, like, because I don't think I've heard a concrete, somebody saying, yes, the Roman Catholics believe it was just a great localized flood, and I just want to, get a little warm and fuzzy on that.
Yeah.
And I find that's a cool answer. Like, the actual topic is dealing with the science and creationism, right? Still?
But is the Earth 6,000 years old? What's the science
behind it?
But as I said, with that paragraph I read, if all those things had happened, you'd be melting the rock as it went. It just couldn't happen.
Evaporating the water with all that heat too, and wouldn't that just make this a barren rock? All that heat.
Yeah, it just doesn't. There's no way you can make it fit without saying God created a miracle. In which case, let's just say the whole thing was a miracle and leave it at that. Stop trying to pervert the science.
Yeah.
And we haven't even gotten into redshift and the stars.
Well, no, we're not getting into redshift and stars because we're not talking about the age of the universe.
That's
but it relates. Oh, okay, but it does relate to the age of the Earth in the set. Yeah, but that's okay.
Paul, I wanted to ask you about this, because we were touching on this earlier on, when When this view of young Earth creationism really began to take hold, and how recent it was?
From what I understand, the modern creationist movement that we currently have sweeping over America is more of a reaction than something that was organic and grew there itself. I mean, there's certain parts of the US that have always been very pious. I mean, you've got the Bible Belt for a start. America has had its religious traditions, and there are some real batshit insane ones. But from what I understand it, the modern creationism as we see it is something that is round about 100 to 150 years old, and not really much more. It really started getting gathering momentum when you started with like the Scopes monkey trials, and when they started taking when they started taking prayer out of schools, and really to some extent as a reaction during the Cold War, where the Russians were seen as godless communists, and you started getting "In God We Trust" and all this kind of shit thrown into put on banknotes and pledges of allegiance and all this kind of stuff, and it's kind of grown from that, and to the point where people are now actually turning around and people are actually talking about how America could possibly be on the decline. That you're starting to see the lunatics taking over the asylum with the Christian right. I mean, they were pretty loony back in the 1980s and the 1970s, but
they were not anywhere near as bad as they are now.
Yeah.
You have the science denial that's thrown in there, and it seems as that's part of the culture, that we're taking our kids out of school because of all the science that they're teaching them, global warming and evolution and all that kind of stuff, and it's a sad thing.
Well, see, when some of these people are brought up into a certain type of culture and a certain type of a belief with this Christianity here in the States, and when that is reinforced that it's this way, and in school you see your kids being taught things differently than what you were taught to be true and what you hold to be true, you're going to have this fear that something's trying to corrupt them, to corrupt them from, the true belief, more or less. And so they get scared. And so that helps create that fear. Then with like the Alex Jonesers and everything of the day, really makes these people want to pull their kids out of school even more, because they listen to these nutters on the far right, fear-mongers, and it reinforces their fear, and they do these things that are just going to build generational of ignorance in a segment of our population.
And the terrible thing about that is, really, society doesn't care. If this lot of folk turned around and wants all their... I mean, we talked about Liberty University earlier on, of a pretend university where there's no liberty. If this section of society wants to turn around and say, we want to teach our kids nonsense, we don't want to know anything about science, we all live on the Gulf Coast, and we don't want to know anything about global warming. In fact, we're going to make it illegal for surveyors to mention the fact that this property could get washed away the next time that there's a cloudy sky. Then society as a whole really doesn't give a toss. all they're doing is chopping their own feet off, and everybody else will say, yeah, thanks very much. We'll have the jobs over here, thank you, and you disappear back and become a third world nation. And it's a terribly scary thing to look at, because it's almost as though you can see the country kind of teetering on the brink, and a lot of Americans turn around and saying, "Whoa, there! This is really scary shit."
Yeah, but here's the thing.
Is Fiona cool? One sec. Is Fiona cool with talking about this, by the way, because it's not really on topic, is it? Just want to clarify.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. So I'll keep my comment out since it's off topic.
No, it's alright. I just want to check with Fiona. If Fiona could clarify, because.
I'm trying to find the genesis of the modern creationist movement. What is the point of it? Why do they need it? Why do they need to deny the science?
Because they need original sin. They need original sin to prop up the entire Bible.
But the problem with that is that still puts, even the Catholic Church, which was pretty big on original sin, doesn't go with young earth creationism.
Yeah, but the thing is,
there's something psychological here.
Yeah, but their faith needs it. Their faith is that insecure that they need it.
I was going from the literalist to the non-literalist, and I know there's certain parts of the Bible that the non-literalist position takes literal because it's supposed to be. That's by the non-literalist. I'm saying it's not 100% literal interpretation. The 100% interpretation of the Bible is just kind of simple, mind-numbing way of looking at something. Like an opiate for the masses. Then you got the way to look at the Bible analytically, and what I would count kind of more the correct way is not the full literal version. Take the parts that are supposed to be literal, take the allegories as allegories, take the poems as poems, or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. That to me seems to be the more correct way to look at it. But it's a more difficult way because you got to think a little bit more about how you're supposed to interpret it at it. So it's all for like a couple different ways, but you're going to have to figure out which way to look at it, which is simpler for a person to do. It's all about really comes down to intellectual lazy people not really wanting to learn. They just want to believe. Mm-hmm. It's easier to believe than to learn. If I was blind, everybody was telling me the sky was blue, I'll believe it. That's kind of easy to do.
Sorry, especially I didn't get that. Doug, what was that?
Like the part, it's easier to believe than to learn. Like if you're blind and everybody's telling you the sky's blue, you're going to believe it pretty generally because you feel like, well, if I'm hearing it from everywhere, not everybody's going to be in on this fucking joke on me,
Yeah. Got that.
So to actually take a look at the Bible in the correct light where you actually have to think and figure out how you're supposed to apply this scripture, is this literal or not literal, it's more thought-provoking, more thought process. Most people just want to show up to church and just believe, because it's simpler, it's easier.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like it's just kind of like how learning just as in general, like how rote learning was so prevalent in America, and it's still kind of where you're just taught to memorize and not actually learn.
Yeah.
Actually, that might be a very good point. In that, if you are going down this literal route, you don't have some of the moral dilemmas that plague everybody. But if you're going to say that, well, every answer is in the Bible, and you're going to read it literally, then the only way to bolster this abrogation of responsibility is to also go with this young earth business. But I still come back to one question. This young Earth business is not based on anything in the Bible at all.
Well, that's what my point, exactly.
It's based on Usher.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll agree with you. I don't really see no basis. I don't see the Bible saying 6,000 years. That's just going back 6,000 years in somebody's family line or whatever. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, yeah, time out, dude. You're missing the whole other point. And plus, you know, things aren't always the best kept history throughout time back then. So how do you know that there weren't few generations skipped?
Yeah.
Even if you're trying to put man at the very big, you know, like however many, whatever you want to count God's days as days, but you know, so close to the very beginning of the creation of the earth versus near the end of the time we know that Earth's been around.
Because I mean, there are the people who accept special creationism, but they will go with the day-age theory, in that each day mentioned in Genesis is actually an age. It's not a literal 24-hour day.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You know,
but I'm still I am still baffled by the existence of the young Earth, the young Earthers, just like I'm baffled by the flat Earthers.
Well, I'm baffled completely by the flat earthers. I can see some poor excuse mutterance being acceptable, sort of, for young earthers in this day and age, just because people want to be dumb or something or not really think.
Yeah.
But just I still have a hard time grasping it with how much we know, and I'm just saying, just because this is the young Earth creation is pretty much the first part of Genesis of the Bible. So this does nothing with the rest of the Bible being taken literally.
Well, let me offer something else. In that, how about the fact that they actually don't believe in young Earth creationism, a large number of them? How about they don't believe? I'm not saying they believe in evolution, but they don't, or cosmology, but they don't. They essentially don't understand it, as we've seen demonstrated. They don't understand it, but they don't actually believe young Earth creationism. But it's a placeholder that they have to maintain, simply to bolster the rest.
I don't know.
Well, when you're going down the Bible literalist route, then and the reason that Genesis is so important to them, I think it has been mentioned here, that if you don't have the fall,
Yeah, this was me who mentioned it.
yeah, if you don't have the fall, then there is no reason for Jesus to turn up and be crucified. So all of the New Testament becomes absolutely irrelevant and pointless if the first few chapters of Genesis are not literal. And in taking that literal, you then have the problem of drawing that line about, well, most of this shit is ridiculous. You're already placing that line that you draw to turn around and say this is reasonable and this is batshit. You're already placing that line way over into the batshit.
Yeah.
See, to me, that's a very not childish. That's not the word I'm looking for. Way of looking at faith.
Simplistic.
No, I want something a bit stronger than that. Because it really is. It's treating it like almost like Aesop's fable, but without the morality lesson. And I think that, I mean, a lot of Christians will say, look, it's just of the flesh, as in being human means we're not perfect, because we follow these, what they call the fleshy desires. You know, we have anger, we have jealousy, we have hatred, we have quick tempers, we lust, all the rest of it. That's just part of being human. There's no need for a literal fall. But where they've ended up needing a literal fall is when they look at the creation account, and every time God creates and God looks at it and sees that it's good, and they see that word good as meaning perfect. So that they then tie themselves in a little bit of a bind, because we are not perfect. So they then have to go with the fall to get us to the current state of humanity.
Yeah.
Well,
And,
I think in some cases it's more of a case that they cannot see why a perfect being would create an imperfect creation and then blame that imperfect creation for its faults. And you have to the only way around that is the fall, in the fact that it was the creation's choice to fall. And well, it's creation's choice to disobey the creator, and therefore the fall resulted, and that's how we became imperfect.
But the problem with that one is that it removes humanity. It removes the role that being human plays in who we are.
yeah, I want to kind of say that the way you guys were talking, it kind of reminded me of like how a child sees a parent when it's young, like about 4 or 5, where it sees the parent like as a almost near perfect or really great, wonderful being. Dad's the hero, mom's the wonderful, loving mother, you know, things like that.
Yeah.
It just kind of screams to me the scripture on childlike faith.
Yeah. And
I kind of see that these people that are holding this young earth creationists, and, you know, they're just taking a blank word at complete face value on them.
yeah. The problem is that in going with this literal Genesis account, they paint themselves into all sorts of corners when it comes to a lot of other passages, especially within the Old Testament. Because when they go with this literal reading, then all sorts of moral issues begin to raise their head, which I don't want to go into. But I think, in a way, how much does a lack of decent education in the basic sciences play a role in the ease with which these people can convince themselves of a young earth? Or, well, maybe rather than convince themselves of a young earth by science, allow them to throw out the science that contradicts a young earth. Where does education fit in that?
Going through a public school system, granted, I went to a magnet school, which is like a quasi-gifted school.
Mm-hmm.
Even there, I've saw people like struggling there was a decent number of people who struggled in the science area of it. And I was kind of shocked at it, but looking back at it, I was in a better school than most. So going into a regular school, there could have been more kids struggling with even a basic level of science in our school. So I really think the education plays a large part, because, like, I heard you guys talking in Pillbox a bit, and once you guys started explaining him evolution a bit more and correctly, he was buying into it a bit, you know? He might still have some questions and some easing feelings, but was getting more of a warm and fuzzy feeling with evolution.
Mhm.
So I really think there's a lot of the lack of education due to our education environment in America, because it's more of memorize this shit versus learn it. You know, it's the rote
Yeah.
learning still. Because I guarantee you, if you could go to most Americans, ask them why does 2 plus 2 equals 4, they couldn't say. It's because they'll be like, 2 plus 2 is 4. Duh, come on. Instead of saying, well, if you take 2 things and another 2 things and you put them together, you now have 4 things. You know? It's the lack of the critical thinking being reinforced in the schools. And it's also part of the parents not being involved in their child's education preschool. Because I luckily, as a child, I had learning difficulties due to chronic ear infection, so I had to work on my speech. But I would get bored with just, doing the speech cards. My mom was like, well, these math cards will help him when he talks, just because he needs to talk more, so I could correct how I actually sound, because I was sounding, like this type,
Yeah.
So she did math flashcards, I think some history not history. We had like natural geographic cards of different animals and their regions and stuff.
Mhm.
So that's what she worked with me, got me to talking and reading it and stuff.
Yeah. So I mean, the other thing that's very interesting is if you manage to deny the science, hide the age of the Earth, is that the reason that so many the young Earth creationists buy in to some of the ridiculous pseudoscience, like the anti-vaxxers, etc.?
Yeah.
They just do not trust the science, and the reason they don't trust it is because they've avoided it.
Yeah.
They've avoided learning it. Is it willful ignorance?
Yeah, or they get to a point where it scares them in their discovery about the stuff,
Yeah.
and they freak. Because I had a friend who's atheist, and she freaked when she found out that there was a mutated form of HIV that didn't actually have the active part of the HIV in a virus, or antivirus, to help the agent spread.
Mhm.
And she freaked at that and wouldn't look anything into that actual strain of the AIDS virus that they were using in that immunization.
Yeah.
So, if you get to the point where you hear something that freaks you and you don't look past, or not necessarily past it, but you look at everything else that goes along with it, and you just hear this one little buzz part, some people freak down when it's scary.
Yeah, that's interesting, actually.
It's a non-believer, mind you.
So Paul was going
They believe in science, but I'm just let you know.
Don't forget one other thing, though, for 1 second, is that if these kids are going to school, and the science education starts at what we're talking, for sake of argument, let's say 10. Prior to the age of 10, don't forget that they've been listening to pastors and such like.
Yeah.
And when these pastors are telling them, well, you're in hell and that, and if you don't believe this, if you don't believe that God created this lot, that anybody who don't believe this is going to hell, then it's already an imprint.
Yeah.
And as soon as you go to school, it's like, especially in this particular administration, oh, this is Obama lying to me.
Yeah. Paul was going to say something.
Yeah. Wayne touched on literally introduced what I was going to say. I don't think so much. I do think that education plays a part. However, I mean the anti-vaxxer stuff is not just limited to the Republican far right lunatic fringe of evangelical nut jobs, right? You're actually getting young, professional, educated people that are going and are falling for this bullshit.
Mhm.
What I think it comes down to is more of trusted sources of information, that you can be taught all of this stuff, or you can be taught evolution to a very high and very detailed degree. However, if you don't believe it, if you think that the person that is teaching you this stuff is possibly lying to you or has an ulterior motive,
Mhm.
then you're going to dismiss it. And it's a very important, and Wayne touched on the thing about you get the fundy fuckwittery on the far right, and not only are they going on about young Earth creationism and climate change denial, but yes, you've got this thing here where you've got the Obama tyranny thing, and the government coming over here and brainwashing you from this. So we can't trust what we're being taught in schools because it is the government brainwashing us. But we trust Jesus, and we trust our pastor. So he must be telling the truth because he's a man of God, and therefore he must be right. He's not going to lie to us.
Mhm.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it comes down to trust.
I mean, I'll introduce another quick talking point on the same subject. I can never remember his name, but I've just remembered it. Check out Pastor David Grice. This is the guy who he's a big fat bastard, right? And he's really a big fat
In your opinion?
bastard. No, it is fact.
Listen, I'm just making sure I can't get flagged for anything.
And he's basically saying he's doing this thing about the King James Bible. Is the most ignorant arsehole I've ever listened to on YouTube, and he's saying the problem is that the science that is getting taught to kids now is not the science that were taught to their parents, and that was not the science that was taught to their parents. He says, however, I have got several printings of the King James Bible. He says, I've got a one on my computer. He says, and I've got a copy of one that was printed in 16 blah blah blah. He goes, and he's going, and it's the same words on every page, and I'm like, and he's going, so anybody says, I don't give, what's the phrase? I don't give a fig for your science. Just read your King James Bible. And I'm like, dear Christ.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds like a good wrap for us or side chat.
Fiona asked. Okay, I'm having a little bit of a delay here, so I realize I've been talking over people probably. So I'm trying to be a little bit more patient here. But Fiona asked about where young Earth creationism came from, and I found this interesting essay here. It's part of a larger article, and he traces the history. Now, I haven't checked up on this, but what he says is very interesting. He points out that during the 1950s, when Russia put Sputnik into the air, which I actually got to see go overhead, but that's another story. Yeah, lucky, I know, because you could see it in Southern California when it went overhead in 1959. The United States ramped up its science program, including ramping up its science program in schools, because we were freaking worried that the Russians were going to pass us. And at that time, evolution was brought back into the biology books in the school, where it had kind of lingered since the Scopes trial.
Mhm.
And then, but what happened is in the background, let me go back to this part of the article I've got here for a moment. So what happened, he says, in the face of this revival, a countervailing movement that has been forming quietly among evangelical and fundamentalist Christians for some time took off with the publication in 1961 of The Genesis Flood by conservative theologian John Whitcomb and engineering professor Henry Morris. They argued on the basis of their belief in an inerrant Bible for a six-day creation and a global flood. They supported their thesis with an extensive presentation of geophysical evidence they claim confirms that all of the current geological strata and fossils embedded in them resulted from the flood. They also claimed that evolution is refuted by the fact of the flood and condemned it as contrary to Scripture and Christian faith. And he says the book had an enormous impact upon many conservative Christians. It set the standard for presenting a case for a six-day creation because the authors used the familiar format of scientific literature, footnotes and references to science publications. And he also points out that basically all of the creationist crap since then has followed this basic same format, pseudoscience, with its footnotes and and references to actual legitimate scientific publications, which they know darn well no one's going to go and read.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think it's a good article, and some of you, might find it interesting, but that makes a lot of sense. I remember that book. I have a copy of that book. As I said, I have a collection of creationist literature, and I've heard a lot of references back to that book in my time. And Henry Morris, I think, is famous. I think he's one of the ones who started the Wedge document, which was this movement.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, you've heard of the Wedge document.
Yeah, that was from that trial.
Well, no, that was the Wedge document is before the trial. The Wedge document. They actually met near.
No, I mean they told about it though during the trial.
Right.
Yeah.
They actually wrote it not too far from where I live in Pajaro Dunes, which I think is hilarious. And the idea of the Wedge document was to create an environment, a political environment conducive to young Earth creationism. And I think this may be, at least with a modern, this makes a lot of sense to me, this article. And that was just a little part of it. So I would suggest it to anyone. I'll put it in the outside chat too.
Do that.
As to where this came from. Okay.
That's interesting. I heard a little bit about the first the thing from around that time area you talked about, but never really anything too much, so I couldn't really say anything on it. I remember hearing that the first what we now where they refer to science and shit on the creation young Earth stuff was came from the 50s from a couple of that's crazy. I kind of see how that certain people have been trying to create environment for that too. To be able to, get young Earth creation taught in the school.
So, has anybody come across any evidence supported by science that would support young Earth?
Not me. No.
No, and I looked. I looked through a lot of the creationist stuff. As I said, I have a collection of their literature here. I listened to those stupid lectures, hoping that maybe they'd come up with something. I have seen nothing that every single objection, every single support that they bring up for young Earth, for the 6,000-year-old Earth, is easily demolished by real science. I see nothing but pseudoscience and a misrepresentation and a perversion of real science.
Yeah.
And I think they get away with this because they know that first of all, they know that a lot of people, as was pointed out, are going to agree with their pastors because that's who they feel they can trust, and they aren't going to bother to look up their references. Many of them don't even understand what they're reading when they look at the references, which I understand. If I get outside of science and I'm reading in social sciences, I kind of have to go get some help sometimes to understand what I'm reading. So they know they can get away. They know they can get away with this, so they do it. And like with Stephen Austin, that is just astonishing that anyone could be that create such an incredible fraud to fool people. It's just amazing.
Just in case nobody noticed, I actually did put the link to that Pastor David Grice in the chat.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Good. Thank you.
Save that for later. You'll, if you want to do a facepalm marathon.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, that's great. So, has anybody else come across anything that could count as either evidence in favour of a young Earth or evidence which contradicts an old Earth?
I would say that there isn't any. That the young Earth aspect of it is entirely contrived from Scripture, and comes about by misunderstanding misunderstanding scientific data, genuine scientific data, or looking for areas within science where certain things, certain tests, certain results, certain experiments may give unexpected results that are not immediately unexpected results that you can't just Google. And one such example, a perfect example, would be carbon-14 in coal. And now I know I'm not allowed to bring it up, but as you was mentioning it right at the beginning about not carbon dating rocks, this one immediately dropped into mind. It is the fact that if you carbon date coal, it is relatively young because there's carbon-14 in it. And the argument would be that carbon-14 comes about via interactions in the upper atmosphere. So surely anything that's been buried underground since the Carboniferous era is not going to have carbon in it, or carbon-14 in it. And coal is carbon.
Sorry, why is that, Paul? Why would it not?
Well, it's been it is the remnants of trees that have been underground for about 300 million years. So when you date coal, the carbon that's in it, or rather the carbon-14 that's in it, should be so minute it shouldn't be detected. There is actually a limit to how far you can go back with carbon-14 dating, and I believe it's somewhere, is it 40,000 years is about as far as you can go back with carbon-14 dating? It's relatively it's relatively young is the day. It's not as you can't go back indefinitely.
Yeah.
The error bars get so the error bars get so so extreme that you can't rely on it. But the thing is that if you carbon date coal, you get a date that is maybe 10, 15, 20,000 years. It's all over the damn place. But the fact is that you shouldn't find any carbon-14 in there at all.
Now that only question: why shouldn't you find any in there?
Because you can't. The carbon-14 is coming from the atmosphere.
Well,
and it gets into your tissues by respiration or by eating.
Not strictly true. If you've got coal that's abutted by granites, carbon-14 is the collection of an extra proton.
Yeah, but that's not addressing why we use carbon-14 dating.
Yeah,
that's the point. The reason that we use the carbon-14 dating is because when you die, you stop taking in the ratio that is in the atmosphere. Remember, the ratio in the atmosphere is taken up by the plants, and by photosynthesis, it becomes various carbohydrate molecules, which the herbivores eat. So they get it in the same ratio as was in the atmosphere. And then we eat the cows, so we get it in the same ratio that was in the atmosphere. But when we die, we stop eating. So you get taking no more carbon-14 in, along with the ordinary carbon-12. The carbon-12 will stay there, but the carbon-14 will decay. So the amount in the tissue will start to drop. Okay? So when you date something using carbon-14, you're talking about how long since it died.
Right.
That's why it can only be used for organic material, like leather and wood and things like that, because it has to have been living at some point and taking in the same ratio as is in the atmosphere And that's the ratio that the plants are taking in. And that's what moves up through the food chain.
So does that include the Turin shroud then? When what were they measuring on that? The fibres in the fabric?
I think it's cotton or linen. It's a natural fibre. It comes from plant material. So because it was plant, it was once living.
Yeah.
So they can date how. I mean, obviously, if that's linen, then and it came from a plant, then and that plant material dates to the 14th century. You can't have it the shroud be made out of that stuff before the plant grew.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what it's about. But Steve was mentioning about another way that carbon-14 can form.
Absolutely, there is.
And this is the one that accounts for the presence of C14 in diamond. And let me think. Is it a neutron capture event?
Yeah. Either a loss of a proton or the gain of a neutron.
Yes.
Radon gas comes out of granite, is naturally heavier than air and will seep down through porous materials, including carbon. So in any fracture line, you will find in areas where you've got either uranium or other radioactive alpha emitters, you will find that there is carbon-14 in the coal. It is in minute quantities because there aren't that many collisions. You get it slightly more in diamonds because diamonds are much denser, but you're talking minute quantities, which gives a very old. In the scale, the half-life of carbon is 5,700 years.
Yeah.
So in 5,000 years, you've got half the amount, and then in 10,000 years, you've got half of that amount, and so on. So it eventually ends up so little in about 30,000 years that it becomes your boundaries of freedom are so small that you cannot be accurate. I worked with the other thing that's seldom mentioned when you really hear people talking about carbon-14 is that there are calibration curves that are worked out. I worked on the Belfast calibration curve. We're gifted in Ireland as having lots and lots and lots of bogs. In those bogs we have the remains of trees, and we've got a fairly joined up tree ring cycle that goes back around 30,000 years, which is a tad embarrassing. And you can not only count the rings, you can also take samples from those rings and measure the carbon within the ring. So you can say that the atmospheric carbon in the atmosphere above Ireland at that time was X. And then you can use that to calibrate the curve accordingly for other items that are found within the area of Ireland. Norway's got one, Canada's got one, and they're all sort of joined up, and the amount that carbon-14 has varied in the last 30,000 years is fairly minimal up until we started blowing up atom bombs and it started to get totally skewed.
Yeah, because I think it's after 1953.
Yeah.
It's useless.
Yeah, and I think this also leads to another thing that you were sort of touching on earlier, is that people in general look for certainties in life, and anybody who has worked in science, the first thing they learn is nothing is certain, and everything will be revisited, reassessed in the light of new evidence. And when somebody comes along and says, oh, we want a definitive dating, carbon-14 is this, that, and the other, and it's unreliable. Yes, it was unreliable at the beginning, but it's getting more reliable as we calibrate it. And there are odd things, like you never ever carbon date the carbon that's in calcium carbonate that comes out of the sea.
Yeah, because that does knacker it completely.
But Steve, just to answer a point you made though, the thing is about science never being certain. Science classes that as a virtue. whereas dogmatic fundamentalist sees that as a fault.
Exactly, and that's that. But the thing is that when people come along and talk to me as a scientist, as a mathematician, where there is a certain amount of, the axioms that we use in mathematics are such that they generally do not vary unless you're being particularly thrown obstinate. The other sciences are refinement sciences. We take them further every day, and what people are looking for is certainty. They're looking for that security blanket of knowing that there is certain things that do not move, and you can see this with what's his face, the bald Scots get Bell, and his preponderance towards logic as certainty. That whereas I am much more skeptical even of science, in the sense when I read a paper, the first thing I'm looking at is where that can take us. And the, I was going to say pseudosciences, but the sort of the applied sciences like computer science, where game theory, number theory, and stuff like that there is pushing the boundaries. There was rumours there that a computer had actually passed a Turing test.
I thought Fiona was sobbing, and it looks like she's absolutely pissing herself.
She lost it.
Go on, Fiona, what are you watching?
I think it's referring. Go on.
On you go, Paul. I can hardly speak.
I think it's. I think it's how it referred to. How Steve referred. Yeah, Steve's description of Bell. It's just the fact that bald Scottish get, and everybody. Oh yeah, Matthew Bell.
Oh yeah, that's what it was.
I thought somebody had upset Fiona and she was sobbing.
But Fiona's not bald.
Do you know what's so ironic about this is have a look at Steve. And he's talking about somebody being a bald git.
The thing is, I've just had a haircut.
That's just a haircut.
I'm bald.
It's not, of all the bald Scottish men that you can think of, though, bald Scottish get, and immediately everybody, oh yeah, well.
Then he said it and just kept going just as smooth, and I'm looking at Fiona and she is just crying.
I only know one bald Scottish git, so I mean, it's a different deal for me to assume that.
Yeah, but what you don't do.
Behave.
That's my last word.
Yeah, sorry about that. I lost track of the conversation completely. Steve was saying something.
I was saying something vaguely interesting.
Go on, please continue.
Where Wayne was asking me about the changing landscape of science, is that most people like certainty. They enjoy the idea that somebody says that this is the way things are, and this is the way they've always been, and they're always going to be like that. And that's what people want, is stability. Science does not give stability. Science is always moving on. A quick troll of even the BBC technical pages where you will see loads of stuff. There was a fascinating thing there. A friend of mine's involved in it on the modelling side. They've built a model of the universe and let it run for the equivalent of 14 billion years, and the picture they've got of the universe is within 70% of the way the universe is now.
But Steve, that don't match the fine-tuning argument.
And the creation argument, because it was set in motion by an intelligence.
But the thing is, they say if it was, what is it, less than a so and so of a percent, then we wouldn't be here. So they won't wash with them, Steve.
Yeah, well, the thing is that actually this is going to probably end up in a series of papers that will actually not kill ID, but it will make it a lot harder for the ID people to argue it, because they have played with the various constants to see what happens, and there is a much wider envelope of things happening. The only one they've really found is the weak nuclear force. It has a fairly tight band, but even that, you're talking about 30–40%, you'll still get a universe. It'll be markedly different from the one we've got, but it will still be a universe.
May I just introduce something which I've never known quite how to put into words? It's a thought that I've had ever since I was a kid, right? Even back when I were a theist, right? And it is this sense of, isn't it amazing that of all the things in the universe, that it's here, and it's like, wow, it's like the chance of that, but, and I'm sure there must be a description for this, a very mundane description, the fact of the fallacy of, from the point of view of the end point. Right? That we only think that because we're here.
Yeah.
What? There must be a name for that. What is it? That sort of misunderstanding.
It's anthropomorphizing the universe.
Yeah.
No, that's the no. I know what anthropomorphism is. It's not. That's not what I'm thinking of. It's sort of like, I don't know, like a perspectivism.
Yes, you're looking back. It's like, if you think about it, it's like looking at the racing results as to who's won at Ascot the day after Ascot, right? And then turning around and trying to work out the odds that the winners would win. Well, the odds that the winners would win would be 1 in 1, because they did.
Yes.
And when you're talking about probabilities, you are talking about probabilities usually in retrospect, based on the idea of whether something would happen before it did. And it's like when you see all these disasters and they turn around and says, oh, there's a 1 in a million years chance of that happening. However, the point being that there might be a 1 in a million chance, but at no point does it say which chance it would occur on, just 1 in a million. There is every possibility that it would actually happen on the first attempt.
Yes.
As there is, it just would mean that there'd be another 999,999 chances after it that it wouldn't. It doesn't mean that you would try. It would only happen on the millionth try.
I'm not particularly on about probability, Paul. I'm on about a fallacious school of thought that thinks we're special because we're here, and that the only reason that they think we're here is because we're here. Are you with me on that? And I know it's a weird thought. I've always struggled to get my head around.
Well, it's the old one that we're pushed at from philosophy, which is, why is there something rather than nothing? And generally speaking, because there is, and as you were, as Paul said, you know, that you're looking back at probabilities. The probability of something having happened is always 1. And you come into the Monte Carlo fallacy at this point where, and everybody falls foul of this, is that if you're sitting and you're making a choice for what you call that, roulette, and you're going, number 7 came up on the last go, it's not going to come up on the next one. So you've reduced the odds by 1. That's nonsense, because a 1 in a billion chance can happen today. It can also happen tomorrow. It can happen in 2 seconds.
I think
that was
I
the
think what I'm
fallacy.
getting at though is more it's purely I think it's purely a form of the argument from ignorance. It's like something like, well, why was I born on Earth, a vital lush place, rather than being born on a barren rock at the arse end of the universe? Simple fact is because you wouldn't be born on that barren rock because
Yeah,
it's not a vital lush place.
you
All the
wouldn't be
conditions
able to answer
necessary
to
for
ask the
us
question.
existed here.
Hang
We
on.
are. Yeah, it could. All the conditions for life and everything. It just happened to be right here in this place.
Yeah,
in
that's
space
the point.
and time.
But I'm
It
just
could also have happen on the other side of the universe. You know. But and we would be asking the same question from the other side of the universe.
now we're getting to the point. But it must be a concept that's been addressed before, and I've never seen it addressed.
Well, Douglas Adams did in The Puddle.
Yes, the puddle.
A puddle becomes sentient and goes, look at this, it's absolutely amazing. This crevice of rock that I'm sitting in fits me exactly. There must have been a designer that fixes it. And that is because we look at patterns. We find patterns. I'm sure Fiona can correct me on this, but I believe that our pattern matching is an evolutionary trait that allows us to spot the saber-toothed tiger waiting in a bush to eat us. We look for those patterns, and that's one of the reasons why I postulate that religion is still with us, is the fact that we look for these patterns. When we find a pattern that suits us, we go, aha, that must be something big and scary that's a necessary being, lives outside space and time.
Go on then, Steve, explain my particular what's the thing? My particular thing for finding desperate to find people's lookalikes. That's pattern.
That's because you're from Yorkshire.
I have this thing where I've got to find somebody's.
There's an entire team of scientists that meet regularly in the Pack Horse on Otley Road in Leeds, trying desperately to find life in Huddersfield.
Right, so anyway, so none of us have actually come up with any evidence in favour of a young Earth or contradictory of an old Earth. I think that's the bottom line.
Well, it all comes down at the end of the day to what you take as being sufficient, and we are blessed over here with a prodigious number of fucking young Earth creationists, and Fiona's probably the only person in the room who'll know the word Thran, but there is Thran as be damned, and you would be hard pressed to find somebody more stubborn in that particular view, that there is nothing that will shake them. They have found certainty, and they are going to reinforce that certainty with whatever means they can. Now, the thing is that I am not certain about the age of the Earth or the universe. I could give you a figure, but the figure is going to be the best guess as it stands now. And in 6 months' time, it's going to be more accurate, and in 10 years' time, it's going to be even more accurate. The particular branch of mathematics that I studied is the one that eventually ended up with multiple universes. And, you know, the great sort of bifurcation in the trousers of time, every time we decide to make a decision, there are two quantum causalities that branch off from that. There's me doing something and there's me not doing something. Now, in my mind as a mathematician, I have no problem with that. That there are millions of me either existing or not existing because I chose to cross a road. And I can rationalize that in my head, but for somebody who isn't schooled in that sort of a way of thinking, that's a nonsense. And there's so little common ground between what we in this room would accept as being full and fair and progressive incrementing knowledge and what other people who have a slightly different skewed view in our particular perspective will accept. And in generally you'll find that there is absolutely no, in my experience anyway, there is no point engaging in YEC unless they're just coming out of it, because there is absolutely nothing you can put in front of them that they won't try and pick holes with.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it all goes back to a point I made earlier. They may claim certainty, but is it just a position rather than a belief that they hold?
Well,
I just don't believe them.
I can claim certainty on certain things.
No, I'm on about these fundies.
Yeah, maybe it was just revealed to them in a way that they can be certain.
Well, this is the thing.
Ooh, that's nearly as bad as carbon-14 and rocks.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, if you're in a discussion with them and they say, and they come up with that answer, and you say, but I don't believe you, I think you're lying, I think it's just a position you take an argument, and they say, well, how do you know that?
Mm-hmm.
It's just it's just, they don't believe it, it's a position that they're taking, it's a lie. That's my position on that.
I don't think it's a lie as such, in the sense that it's probably a sin of omission rather than commission, and the fact that they're not lying, they're not going to convince you or me, Wayne, because we are fairly transient in our opposition to such things. They're reinforcing their own belief, their own set of boxes that need to be ticked, and the cognitive dissonance that results whenever faced with somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. They have to either walk away or come up with this rationale that they have constructed. Now that rationale may be incorrect, but I think it's not barefaced lying. Some of it is, but generally speaking, the poor benighted souls that I've come across that think Jesus rode in a dinosaur, they actually believe that. It's not.
Yeah, there are. I mean, I don't want to speak about her because she's not here. But that one from last week with that young girl, well, that's a young girl, she was a married woman, but she only looked like a wee slip of a thing. And I went in that hangout, and she came across as really nice and sweet. And I didn't realise to start with where she was coming from. Because I didn't know what conversation she had with Fiona that precipitated the hangout. And then she says, yeah, well, I'm coming from it from a creationist perspective, and I'm like, oh, righto.
Yeah,
Then.
she's asking questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is unusual.
Yeah, that's true, but it was slightly dismaying. I'm thinking, like, yeah, she weren't a stupid person.
No. But the problem is this, and I think Becky hit on it when she described Steve Austin as being an out-and-out fraud. Because it's the lies. People have been lied to.
Yeah.
And I think Galaxy Dreams touched on this. But she's now coming across all sorts of stuff that she didn't know about before. Yeah. And she's really cross.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe that's got a lot to do with it.
But that girl from last week, how old was she? About 25?
I don't know.
We'd be saying she was married. I'm just.
But she's asking questions.
No. The point I'm making of Fiona is that the fact that she got to 25, and had to ask those questions at 25.
But the thing is, I'm going to come across as a grumpy old fucker now. Basically, I put the finger fairly and squarely within the UK anyway at the way they fucking Thatcher changed education from teaching empiricism, this education by fucking osmosis. You set somebody down in a physics class and they walk out after an hour and they've absorbed physics.
Yeah.
I was taught Euclidean geometry. I was taught calculus. I was taught from first principles.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was fucking boring, but at the end of the day, I knew how things worked.
Yes.
Kids
I'm not sure if I don't know if which generation I belong to, Steve. I don't. Describe that by osmosis to me. How would that work?
basically you're sat down in a room and told to play with circles. My son, who's 24, nearly, he was taught about pi not as a relationship between radius and diameter or circumference. He was basically given circles and told to play with them and then come back, and then the teacher said, and this is why. That's nonsense. You have to, when you're learning, you have to be shown.
No, I mean, I grew up in Thatcher's Britain. I mean, I was when I started comprehensive school. That was 1984. I was 11 years old. Finished my A levels in 1991. So that puts me within. No, there were none of that.
Yeah, certainly more common now than it was. Sort of, I was 60s and 70s, and it was the proper old-fashioned beat it into you education, which there are things wrong with. But
yeah, I mean, my comprehensive school was very disciplinarian. It was secular but disciplinarian.
Yeah, the thing was that we were allowed to once we'd got the first principles of something like calculus, it suddenly became apparent as to what use it was.
Mhm.
And similarly in biology, we were allowed to take things to bits. And yeah, I know there's people probably would be against dissection now, but you know, we were allowed to take rabbits to bits and find out where all the bits joined together and you know how things worked. And whereas now, certainly the kids that I see coming through work have been channeled in this strange way of education, where even now I was fairly obviously going to be a scientist from about 13, but we still had to have some art all the way through the A level, and language as well. It was compulsory to do both Latin and Greek to 16, and then take one of them on to A level. I did English and art as well to A level, as well as 4 sciences. And you know, the thing is, I grew up with the joy of literature as well, and you know, even sitting at the dinner table chatting to people, and what does that word mean? It's not a difficult word. It's one in fairly common parlance, and knowing the difference.
Can we get this back? Because I'm trying to wind this up now, because we've been going for 3 hours. Right, so we haven't come across evidence in favour of a young Earth. We haven't come across evidence against an old Earth. We are not claiming that we know it to be true. We're not claiming to know an absolute age of the Earth. But what we can say is that we have a minimum age that the Earth can be, and it isn't 6,000 years.
Yeah.
But it's in the billions.
What, 4.5 billion or something like that?
Yeah. So I think that's. I mean, because nobody has. We've looked at some of the evidence that young Earth people have used, and been able to deal with it. For example, the C14 in diamonds or coal, the plate tectonics and all the rest of it, and all their objections are based on a lack of understanding of the science that's used. I think that would be a fair summary, really, of what we've discussed.
Yeah.
But it's a lack of understanding of the science that is being used. So then the final question then I'm going to ask before I wind it up is, how do you tackle that?
Gently.
Yeah. Because it's a difficult one, in that, I mean, previously I would have thought, well, educate them in the science, but I think that too good a job has been done with some of these people by those who are willing to lie or manipulate data when it suits them.
I have
And so
a
that
possible
people do not-
answer.
So then people don't then trust the science, and that's been an agenda, I think, is to instill into people a mistrust of science and scientists.
I have a possible answer, Fiona, if that's okay. Right, but the thing is, a lot of these people are too scared of upsetting the audiences, right? Now, if the celebrities, right, these are massively respected celebrities, I'm not on about scientists now, I'm on about public figures. People who are making millions and billions of quid every year, right? If they were going board because don't forget, TV is where most of these people get their information. If these people just have informal television slots, basically explaining certain things, get the celebrities on board, get these people to listen to, like, I don't know, I won't say not B because he's an idiot, but people of that social strata, people who influence the young, get them on board with it.
No, I think the problem there though is, I mean, I don't think using celebrities is the way to go, because, I mean, I am not really going to sit down and listen to Kerry Katona talks about evolution.
But if she's been briefed.
But that's the problem, because then you're making propaganda. You're playing right into their hands. You're using propaganda. That's the problem.
Yeah, but if they're hearing it, what I'm saying, the main concern is if these people aren't hearing the information. If they're getting homeschooled and they're not hearing it, this is the problem.
I know where you're going. I can see what you're saying, and I actually agree with Fiona, but I agree with you on principle about getting this out there. I think turning around and getting, I don't know, Kerry Katona to turn around and talk about quantum physics is just ludicrous.
That ain't gonna happen, is it?
No, I mean,
you could use your chest to discuss simple harmonic motion.
I mean, for instance, Angelina Jolie, for instance, she's looked up to.
No, you're wrong people. Wrong people. It's things like, oh, what the hell do they call him? Bloody hell!
By the way, it's only an embryo of an idea, Paul. So please feel free to elucidate.
There is some sense in it. I forget his name. It was the physicist who was also the drummer or keyboard player from
Brian Cox.
Pardon?
Brian
Cox, yes.
Played the keyboard with D. Ream.
Yeah,
things can only get better. How wrong was he?
Folk like that, right? He knows how to work the media machine. He knows how to present himself in front of cameras. You've got Neil deGrasse Tyson in the US is also the same. Scientists are notoriously bad at being able to communicate with a general audience, but every now and again you get one that's awesome. I mean, you have this certain amount of worship of these people. I mean, Carl Sagan. We look at Saint Carl of Sagan. Saint Carl of Cosmos, right? And you've got like Richard Dawkins, who we all look up to as the biologist Richard Dawkins, the great atheist, and all that. And what we need is people who know science to convey science.
Yes.
That's where your man, who is the current chair of the what's it called, the public, what Dawkins used to be, he's a physicist, Khalili, is very good at.
Yeah.
But he's not been pushed in any way. And the problem, I think, is slightly different, is that we can present, and science can present, a unified front to people. But the trouble is that whenever they leave the dinner table or they turn the computer off, they're going back into the environment that's going to reinforce the beliefs that they have.
This is why I emphasise the use of popular culture.
Right. Hang on. This, I would say not so much as popular culture. It's make these folk. I mean, this is the problem. People are obsessed over, what Jordan's going to be doing next, or what Justin Bieber said. Who gives a fuck? Really, seriously, who gives a fuck? These people do not matter. They're just, but they do. It's not a case of make use of people who say nothing but drivel and get them to say something meaningful. It's let's have society listening to people who've got something meaningful to say. And when the likes of Ken Ham and his bunch of idiots turn around and say, we challenge what you've said on the likes of Cosmos or whatever, right? Take them on head on and turn around and say, no, you're talking bollocks, pal. You are absolutely, and here is the science why. I'll give it, okay, Neil deGrasse Tyson with the I've been following what's been going on with the cosmos. The ridiculousness of, when you see the parodies, is a cosmos for creationists. And it's absolutely ridiculous. And people look at that and go, yeah, that's right, isn't it? Yeah. Creationism is bollocks.
Sorry.
Yeah, creationism. Oh, sorry, Sophia.
No, on you go.
I'll shut up because I was just going to continue on what I just said. So,
I wanted to touch on what I mentioned. The problem with this would be, and it's that if you bring in someone who is as near brain dead as you can be and still walk and chew gum at the same time, and have them expounding on scientific topics that everybody knows they know bugger all about, then what you are doing is you're playing into the hands of those people who will say, they were told to say that. And because we get these accusations all the time, all these scientists that can't think for themselves and just follow the crowd,
Fiona,
and that would feed into that.
How is that any different to a paid voiceover actor? It is no different, but they don't get called in that way. All they are is briefing an audience based on a paycheck and a script.
Yeah, I think that's different.
Okay, you want to go over?
That is different. I think we would, if you do that, if you bring in people who do not know the subject to expound on the subject, you are doing exactly what we have accused the creationists of doing.
I mean, look at weather girls, for instance. Weather people used to be meteorologists, and now they're television presenters.
I look at weather girls frequently.
Yeah. But the problem is, they have still actually specialised in it. They're not just presenters.
Not necessarily. They might not, like, for instance, what's the name? The ones that you get on do a really pretty one on Look North.
I don't know.
A few years ago, they might be still doing it. What I'm saying is, then all they've done is specialise in they've learned how to present the weather. They're not meteorologists, but that don't mean to say the weather that they're presenting is wrong. And it's same with getting popular culture to or let's just even say they're presenting programs on it. I mean, for instance, Brian Cox is fine, but the problem is he's one of the scientists. We need to get the people who the kids look up to.
No, but I'm sorry, you're running into a really big problem here. Because what you're suggesting is that Kerry Katona validate what Brian Cox is saying about subatomic particles. And that strikes me as ludicrous.
Well,
it really does.
I never
Brian
mentioned
Cox should only be listened to if Kerry Katona agrees with him. And that is dangerous. That is so dangerous. It's the cult of personality. And that's what Ken Ham relies on. And that's what Kent Hovind relied on. And we see the dishonesty in that. And I would hate for science to go down that route, where we only accept what Brian Cox says if Kerry Katona has said something about it. I think that's really dangerous.
No, because you might get kids saying, hey, oh, I'm not going to say Kerry Katona because that's ridiculous. You might get, let's have a think.
But it's where it ends up.
That's the problem. And because the accusation can then be levelled at the scientific community that all of this is just propaganda because they don't have the scientific data to back up their claims. So therefore, they're going out on this campaign. And science has got to stand on its own.
Well, what's wrong with a campaign? I mean, like, let's just say if all celebrities that youngsters look up to went out, appeared in public with shirts that said, with like the Darwin fish one and like.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's absolutely fine, but you can't use them to validate the science, and this is the problem, because when you do that,
well,
you're getting into the realms of not quite.
I'm not talking about validating the science. I'm about publicising the science.
Yeah, but I mean, all that's going to happen is that people are going to say, are they making an informed decision? How did they reach their opinion? I mean, they don't even trust the scientists to reach their own conclusions on their own bloody science. So how are they going to trust Kerry Katona?
You've got this real thing of that, Kerry Katona.
It's just the name that popped into my head. But no, that's the thing. What they're saying is that I've spent 30 years specialising, right?
Yeah.
And yet they'll still accuse me of not understanding the science enough to make an informed decision.
Yeah, but
now, if I'm not good enough to make some sort of comment on molecular biology, then where does that leave any utterings by a celebrity who's never done science in their life?
Because, as we know, you're not famous, Fiona.
No, that's your problem.
If somebody is famous, they're automatically listened to. No, we know this.
No, that's not going to happen with science. You really think that the utterances of a celebrity who knows nothing about science is going to sway young Earth creationists? It's not.
The thing is, if you get it's not a case of getting celebrities to talk about science. It's to get scientists to become celebrities.
Yes,
now,
that's the trick.
Yeah, because the thing is, when you do get scientists that become celebrities, they're really big celebrities. And some of the most popular programs on television, some of the most definitive water cooler moments, you know, the kind of TV that people talk about for a week afterwards, are science programs. You know, you get like some of these popular science programs and people watch it because it's inspiring, you know. Everybody loves science and things like that. And do you know what? Even creationists watch it.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, they maybe they'll look at it from a different point of view, but they watch it. Now the thing is the direction you want to be moving is to have creationists watching this kind of thing, and then the guy who's presenting this kind of thing, the science guy, be a real scientist and be able to go on television, and when they end up sat in a studio with some talking head twat from the Institute of Creation Research bobbling on about Noah's flood, to be able to turn around and say, you're talking bollocks, mate, and here's why. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all points, knock you out of the water, sink Noah's ship, piss off, right?
Yeah.
That's what you need, just to be able to destroy.
Well, how's this then?
Look at Bill Nye. he went. Everybody was going, "Oh fucking hell, Bill Nye! What if Ken Ham? What if Ken Ham turns around and outdoes him?" And all Ken Ham did was, "I've got a book," and everybody just took the piss out of Ken Ham for that. And Bill Nye just appeared on television program after television program after television program as the science guy that leveled creationism.
Yep. And the other thing is this, and here's the danger. If you go down the route of using celebrities, right, here's a problem. I bring along Kerry Katona to talk about evolution, and the other side brings along Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
Right. Who's the biggest star? Who are they going to listen to?
Well, here's the thing. You see, that's why you get on board. Such as, like, if for instance, Cosmos, right? If Neil deGrasse Tyson and Seth MacFarlane wrote that, right, and got Bradley Cooper to present it, fucking hell, there wouldn't have been a fucking young girl in the world who wouldn't have watched it.
But see, that's the thing. If they are accepting it because of who says it.
No, it's not because of who says it, but that's why they watch it. The message gets out, it doesn't matter who presents it.
I still think you run the risk.
And then when it comes to like talking about it and appearances, you have them both on. You have the presenter and you have the writer of it on, and you make tacit agreements that the main person interviewed is not the presenter. It's you know what I mean, the writer of it gets.
I think there are all sorts of dangers in going down that route.
But it's there, and it's a possibility, and it's an idea.
I think Paul has got it bang on in that you have to get.
What if that doesn't happen? What if that doesn't happen?
And what if it doesn't happen with all these celebrities, and then the accusation is levelled at science that you tried propaganda and it didn't work. You tried sleight of hand. You used people that know nothing about the subject. That's even worse.
You can only be honest. You can only be honest. I mean, what you can do is you can ridicule them for the stupid, nonsensical beliefs. I mean, straight after the Ken Ham debate, about a week or so later, there was that, was it HBO documentary about creationists where they were turning around and saying, if my Bible turned around and told me that 2 and 2 was 5, I would believe it. And it's like, oh, fucking hellfire. And you look at you look at these, having watched Ken Ham get absolutely demolished, and then people holding up signs that turn around and says, how can the sun rise without Jesus? It's like, oh, fucking hell. All you can do is take the piss out of them.
Yeah. The other thing is, and here's a problem. Even if you were going to get these scientists to do this, here's your problem, and this is what's happened. The media are not prepared to entertain it. I mean, I used to watch Horizon, and I've stopped watching Horizon because it is so dumbed down, it's unbelievable. Yeah. It's terrible. And they keep repeating the same thing over and over and over again, as if you have the attention span of a gnat. They keep recapping. Every 5 minutes, they end up recapping the previous 10 minutes. And that does my head in. Horizon used to be a program that would even challenge you when you watched it. You know, I used to set my video recorder so I could watch it more than once in case I'd struggled with it. And now, my son, who is 14, he started watching Horizon when he was 7. Now, what science programs do we have? We used to have Tomorrow's World. That's the real, that was a really basic one. And it's gone. Horizon is just not worth watching anymore.
It's like you have 10 minutes of science, and after watching it for 30 or 40 minutes, you only end up with 10 minutes of the real thing. Everything else repeats.
Yeah, it's all bullet points and infographics. It's
yeah, and I mean that's hopeless, but because the media will not do it. Now look, can anybody remember that lecture that Brian Cox did? And the audience was a whole bunch of celebrities. And that was absolutely fantastic. Because he used the members of the audience in his experiments and demonstrated the principles that he was talking about.
I have a confession to make, though, in that I find Brian Cox unwatchable.
You might, but most of the female part of the human race finds it unwatchable.
For instance, there's only so many helicopters and sitting in Namibian deserts I can fucking cope with.
No, but I'm talking about the lecture that he gave on the physics.
Yeah, I'm on about his series. I hated them. I absolutely hated them.
And I think the problem is that this is how television producers are insisting it be done these days, because they are, in a way, catering to those with a really short attention span. Now, if we always play to the lowest common denominator, then we're all going to go back to sitting in caves saying "ugh." You know, we have to, I suppose, accept that some people are going to be unreachable.
I believe those caves are now known as football stadiums, and it's not going to get through.
Don't start me off on that one, Cliff.
Don't talk about football. We're in the middle of the World Cup. Just do not talk about football.
No.
But this is the thing. I think you're not going to get everybody scientifically literate. But if, in attempting to do the impossible, you dumb it down so much that everybody ends up scientifically illiterate, then I think you shot yourself in the foot. You have to say, look, we won't educate people about science. Now, we're going to have to use some way of educating them that isn't so dumbed down that a cabbage can learn it.
The thing is,
you've got to actually have accessibility.
So you've got the problem of finding the balance between accessibility and knowledge.
Well,
yes, and that's the problem, because getting that balance, and also the people who are making the decisions when it comes to programming, etc., aren't really scientists either.
If you think back, a few decades, going back to the 50s and 60s and 70s, if you look at what was going on in the Western world at the time, you had the Cold War and the arms race. Being a scientist was considered cool. Yes. You know, you were somebody that you got to see what you were aiming at. You know, when Kennedy turned around and said we're going to go to the moon in this decade, suddenly rocket scientists were rock stars. And you know, we all know who they are, Werner von Braun and the whole lot. We grew up looking at watching people jumping up and down on the moon, going into space and all those kind of things. All those people were not dumb fucks, right? They didn't just pick them off the street and see if they were fit in a fucking suit. You know, those guys have got degrees, PhDs, masters. They're mission specialists who know what the fuck they're doing, and that's how you get to the moon. You don't get to the moon. You don't get to the moon by being good at football or being able to play a musical instrument. You get to go. You get to go at the moon because you can do physics, and you're a geologist and all the other things, right? It's like the same thing when you look at like Top Gun and jet fighters. At the time when they were turning around, when they were in the Cold War, and it was the arms race there, going from propeller-driven airplanes to supersonic jets. I'll tell you what, right? You don't get to fly a supersonic jet with just basic training, right? You need the equivalent of an aeronautics of a degree. You know, you have to be qualified. it's a sad fact that all those people that got bullied at school by jocks, all the nerds, they're the ones that are flying fighter jets, raining down fire on people carrying on the grunts, you know.
Yeah.
But now we make football stars and actors and people who can't even be asked to wear a pair of fucking swimming trunks that go all the way round as important. As important, you know, I've got a couple of strawberry daiquiris and my knob's hung out. I'm important, look at me. No, that's what's important in the 21st century. We need to relegate that back into the bullshit corner and turn around and say to people, no, what we want is we want to progress, and we need young minds to aspire to this. You know,
when I went to university, I was wanting to study Japanese, and it took a couple of years for me to get in. And in that couple of years, it went from being 6 to being 4. Sterling and Durham shut down their departments for teaching Japanese. And there, over the last 20 years, I believe, there's been a gradual decline in the sciences and languages, humanities, things of that nature. Whereas there's been a huge increase in people who want to do electives for weathermen or women, or be on TV, you know, journalism, things like that. It's the equivalent of there are more people trying to be lawyers than there are lawyers.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the goal is to be famous nowadays by any means necessary.
I'm going to wrap this up anyway. So we've basically come to the conclusion that the Earth is probably old, and that the reason that a lot of people don't accept it is because they're shite at science. Does that sum it up?
Those damn creatards.
It's pretty damn close.
Yeah, I think that does sum it up. Right, so I'm going to wrap it up and take this off here. Thanks for joining me, everybody.
Oh, yeah, thanks for having us.
It's been interesting. Next week, we are going to discuss...
Attempt to discuss.
Yes. Yeah, and listen, next week I am going to be strict about topics, okay?
Go, girl.
We're going to discuss special creation.
Special being the operative word.
Yeah. We're going to discuss... we're not going to stick to 6-day creation because I think we have covered the age of the Earth as a separate one because it was such a big topic. So we're going to look at everything poofed into existence, or...
Oh, that'd be a good one. Yeah, I'll go with that.
That's or it's going to be abiogenesis and evolution. I don't want to take it down the road of there is no God. This isn't a belief thing. This is a science.
No,
this is stick purely science and stay well away from there is no God. Okay? So, as I say, thanks for joining me, and I hope you can make it next week. You lot of miscreants along the bottom of my screen that I can see. Nothing but trouble with a lot of you. So, everybody say bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Theme music.